18th of March 2023, and the very first Northern Lightning is kicking off as I pick up this microphone. Most of you were here for the dinner yesterday, but there are some new faces. Very good to see so many people show up for the biggest Bitcoin conference ever organized in the Nordics. I just want to tell you a little bit about my vision for this conference, because I want this to happen every year. And I want people to have a practical experience of Bitcoin. Also people who know about it and nerd as much as we do. That's why I want to create a new concept every year. This year it's a rave. We're doing a rave for some reason. Because I live in Berlin. That's what I know. Next year maybe Metal Festival in Finland. Anyone? Beer Festival in Denmark. What? Midsummer in Sweden? Yeah. So, the reason we're in Bergen is because the ethos of Bitcoin is not to give power to the powerful. It is not to put even more centralization, even more focus on the people who get all the attention. So I brought it to my own hometown, streets that I grew up in, the place where people I love live. And I said this yesterday, but I think it's worth repeating. I did not get into Bitcoin to get rich. In fact, when I got into Bitcoin, I thought it would fail miserably. So I thought it was fun and ideologically correct and ethically correct. But I still thought it would fail. Now I think it will succeed, and it's terrifying. Terrifying because most people will not be prepared for that change and the consequences that it implies. And Norway in particular is perhaps in a really, really bad spot for this because we're so lucky. We got it really, really good. We got great banking services. We got high trust in government. We got well-functioning money. And so there is no reason for people here to appreciate the need for change and perhaps the inevitability of change. I'm hoping to change that with Northern Lightning because it's one of those places in the world where if nobody does something, we will fail. That is the default outcome for a country like Norway. We will fail. Countries like El Salvador that are failing in the old system will succeed because they see the need for Bitcoin immediately and have 20-year head start. We don't, and we will fight with nail and tooth to hold on to the past unless every single person in this room spreads the knowledge that they acquire, the enthusiasm they acquire, the ethos that they hold, and use Bitcoin as a heart-to-heart technology. And I hope that when we organize Northern Lightning next year, wherever that is, we will have a room that is 10 times bigger, and you can all say that you were the people who bootstrapped Bitcoin in Scandinavia and the Nordics. So, welcome to Northern Lightning. Our very first speaker today is Knut Svanholm. You all know him, I hope. If you don't, he is a fantastic author who has written 3 books about Bitcoin. Perhaps the most famous is Everything Divided by 21 Million, which I have tattooed on my wrist, as the sucker I am. And yeah, without further ado, I am so proud to introduce Knut Svanholm as the very first Northern Lightning speaker ever.
Thank you. What's the difference between, by the way, I'd call myself a hopium salesman and not an author, but anyway, what's the difference between a shovel, a toothbrush, and a computer? They're all tools, right? So they're tools that humans made in order to save themselves time somehow. So a shovel, you can shovel dirt or snow with it, so it helps you with that. A toothbrush, you can brush your teeth with it, or you can clean the toilet with it. But what does a computer do? What differentiates a computer from other tools? The thing is that all a computer does, it's an extension of our minds. It helps us think. Because a computer is better at mathematics than we are, or it's better at calculation, really. Not really mathematics, but just putting ones and zeros together and converting binary code into something we can understand. My computer identifies as non-binary, by the way. It does that by showing me graphics and stuff, and because I don't really speak binary. So a computer, like all other tools, it's there to save a human time somewhere. But a computer doesn't do anything with the physical world. It just helps us with mathematics. At its core, it's just a fancy abacus. It helps us calculate things. So it's all information. What is Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin money? Is Bitcoin a commodity? Is it digital gold? Is it a cryptocurrency? I would say it's neither. It's an agreement between us people here on a fixed set of rules that we can use to express value to one another through information, through code, through mathematics. So all it is a linguistic tool to express value with, and we use mathematics to do that. So we know, by using mathematics, we can all verify that everyone's following the rules. So we set up a system of rules without rulers. You've heard the expression. But what does that mean? Can you own a Bitcoin? What is ownership? Ownership is like, I own this hat. So this hat is legally mine because I paid money for it. If I give my hat to Kalle here, then I still own the hat, but Kalle is in possession of my hat, and he's better looking than me in it. So it's still my hat, and I can tell Kalle, I know he's an adversarial thinker, so I can tell him, please give me my hat back. And he has two options. He can say, of course, Knut, here's your hat, or he can say, fuck you, Knut, I'm keeping the hat. So there's a difference between ownership and possession. You can own something, but it can still be taken away, as you've all experienced since you've all paid taxes at one point. And you've all experienced inflation, which is basically the same thing. Someone is taking stuff away from you without your consent. And Bitcoin gives us a way to exchange goods and services and favors with one another without this need for a third party or someone that can, get some value out of that exchange without providing any of us. Like if I do this thing with Kalle and the hat, we're in an anarcho-capitalistic relationship with one another. There's no rules or rulers. And Bitcoin is the same. It just helps us collaborate with one another voluntarily or consensually. So that's all it is. The computers, do miners create Bitcoin? Not really, right? Because miners have to follow the rules too. If we don't want what miners are giving us, like the node runners are using software to show their preferences about what Bitcoin is to them, to the miners. So the miners are employed by the node runners to create the Bitcoin. So it's not really the miners who make the Bitcoin. It's not even the node owners, because the node owners, like every payment is routed through a node. So it's not even the node owners, it's the users who use those nodes for their payments. But it's not even that. It's like all people. Even no-coiners create Bitcoin by interacting with Bitcoiners and selling goods and services to them. There's no such thing as a circular economy. It's all connected. So all we did was find a way to use mathematics and communication to communicate value with one another without having to give any of it up, or giving as little as possible of it up, because we still have to pay miners something. The northern lightning just went off, Erik. Kind of liked it though. Yeah, that's better. You like that? Okay, where am I going with this? So you don't really own a Bitcoin. Like El Salvador has no Bitcoins, MicroStrategy has no Bitcoins. Some guy has the Bitcoins. Like someone has the private keys. But what does it mean to have a private key? Are you in possession of a private key? You're not really in possession of a private key. You know the private key. Either you know the seed phrase, or you know the location of the private key or the seed phrase. So what you are when you're a Bitcoin owner, you don't really own anything. You're the keeper of a secret. That's all. That every Bitcoiner is just keeping a secret from someone or from everyone else. So everyone with access to that secret has access to those Bitcoins. So what does this mean? The easiest way to explain this is to imagine if you remember a Bitcoin seed phrase. So you remember 12 magic words, and then you destroy the little paper the magic words was on. So the only place in which those Bitcoins, or the information about the private key exists, is in your head. That means those Bitcoins are literally in your head. So you are your Bitcoins. There's no way to argue against that. You are your Bitcoins. They are in your head, literally. But that's not only true if you destroy the seed phrase. If you're the one who knows the secret to where the whereabouts of the seed phrase is, you are your Bitcoins too. You have the information about them, and the information about the asset is the asset. There's no distinction here between a human being and a human being's Bitcoins. So we not only like Bitcoin or hold Bitcoin or whatever, we are Bitcoin. Everyone in this room is a Bitcoin. And this changes absolutely everything about human interactions. Because what is a Bitcoin? It's an expression, it's a perfect representation of the scarcity of human life and the time we have on this earth. Because it's also absolutely finite, the way death makes our time on this earth pretty finite. And the same is true for Bitcoin. So we now have a tool to express that to one another, which means we have perfectly sound money, which means we have a perfect way of interacting with one another voluntarily without someone leeching value off of the transactions, which means from this point on, everything gets better for every human being on Earth. It's a bit far-fetched and a bit hopium-y, but if you really think about it, that's what it is. And if you think about how hard it is to change Bitcoin, I'd say it's an agreement on a fixed set of rules. Like the analogy I often use is to chess. If you know the rules of chess, you can interact with every other chess player in the world, and not even a big chess committee or the owners of chess.com can change the rules of chess without having an overwhelming majority of the chess players wanting that change to happen. Like the last rule change in chess was like 1300 years ago, when en passant was discovered or invented or whatever. But the thing is, so you get the network effect of chess. So you can choose to play chess cash on a 64x64 squared board with no pieces on it, or chess theorem where the rules change with every move. So you can play all these other stupid games, but you won't have as many. You won't have the network effect. You won't have as many players to play with. But Bitcoin is not only the game of money, but the game of fucking everything. Where it's like the perfect system to conduct human affairs. So you get the network effect, and like sooner or later everyone's on board, because everyone in here has used Bitcoin and seen its superiority and how it hedges against inflation and everything, and how we can interact without third-party intervention. We know how powerful this thing is. And it's just a matter of time before everyone else figures out as well. It might take 5 years or 5 generations or 5,000 years. We don't know how long it will take. But I suspect it's faster than most people think, because it's so superior when you start thinking about it in this context, that this is just a way to interact with one another. And the curious thing is, if this is just in our brains, in our minds, and if computers are just an extension of our minds, if this is all it is, then we had this ability within us all along. We just didn't know how to utilize it. We all intuitively knew, like when you're in school, when you're a kid, you know that you shouldn't beat up the other kid and take their stuff. That's a bad thing to do, and to be friendly to the other kids is better. So we all intuitively know that. But now we found a way to express it, and we found a way to store our wealth within our minds. And so makes violence less profitable, because right now I can threaten anyone in the world and ask them to give me all their bitcoins, but I have no way of knowing if they actually did so afterwards. They might have given me a tiny percentage of their total net worth in bitcoin. And that's true for every human being on earth right now. So it's already changing the dynamics of violence. So that's why I find it so immensely fascinating, and I hope you can start seeing Bitcoin in a different light. Like, start thinking about it for what it actually is. It's not a shovel, it's not a toothbrush, it's not a computer, it's not money, it's not an asset. It's information, and it's an agreement on a fixed set of rules. And we are Bitcoin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Knut. I fucking love that guy.
We talked about that a bit earlier, that the trust in general in Norway is very high. The trust in government is high. The trust in the central bank is high. The trust in the monetary system is high. And yeah, people don't experience that there's a problem with the money that they use in the daily life. They experience that the money functions very well. They believe that the monetary system functions very well. And it's kind of hard to argue against that as well, because it functions in the daily life as it should do. But at the same time, it's not sustainable in the long run. And we're fast approaching a crossroads which will have us make some important decisions on what path we're going to go forwards. And so on the one side, you have the separation of money from state with Bitcoin. And on the other side, you have central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. And they're vastly different. One has rules, but no rulers. The other system is going to be absolutely controlled by the government and the central bank. And I think many people in Norway find both of these roads equally terrifying right now. But I think it's also important to explain that one of these roads, the road to the right, is vastly worse than the other alternative. The reason why this is important is because there's very little, the critics are not very loud when it comes to the road to a CBDC. And it's important to make people aware of the challenges and problems that going down this path might have on society. So to talk a little bit about the CBDC first. What does the central bank say about the CBDC? In their own words, they say the central bank of Norway, they must have absolute control over the core of a CBD system. This quote is taken from one of the reports that the Central Bank of Norway has put out. And they very clearly state that the premise for a CBDC is that they have, and I quote, absolute control over the system. But at the same time, when we criticize and we ask questions about how this is going to function, they usually answer with the same thing. And that is, this is the governor of the Central Bank of Norway, and she says a CBDC must be firmly rooted in democratic institutions and with strict restrictions on the use of data, and this will prevent the CBDC from being used for control and surveillance. This is quite funny, because this was a seminar that the Central Bank of Norway had a couple of months back. And one of the things they had a lot of speakers there talking about the possibilities of what you can use with a CBDC. So half an hour later, on the same stage, an advisor to Norges Bank goes on stage and he says, well, one of the things you can use with a CBDC is that you can just connect it to the GPS in your car and you can track. You can be charged based on where and how far you drive. So we can continually track your car everywhere you go. And, I mean, if this is not a contradiction to what the governor said, then I don't know what is. And this is interesting as well because he used this as a positive thing, right? I mean, it's much more simple that you can just be charged automatically instead of having to pay your bills manually, as we often do now. But still, total disregard for the breach of privacy and where this might lead down the road with these control functions in the long run. Another thing I found very interesting, because when I was working on these slides, I was kind of thinking about what data or what examples I would use. And lo and behold, the Norwegian broadcaster NRK, the biggest media house in Norway, or one of the biggest, they made a quite big article on CBDCs that they published on Thursday. And this person here called Glenn, he does not work for the Central Bank of Norway, but he has wrote a master thesis about how a CBDC can be used. And he has been working with a work group in Norges Bank that works with CBDCs, and he's also been talking with a lot of leading experts on the field. So the examples that I'm going to show you now is not examples that is taken out of thin air. These are examples of, very clear examples of what a CBDC can be used for. And as he says, this is a golden opportunity to push our society in a greener direction. Sounds good, doesn't it? We all agree? I presume not. But okay, so three of the examples there. A little bit of the text is gone, but I will read it to you. So the first example is, what if you had a system that rewarded you every time you participated in organized volunteering? So you do something good in society, the state can reward you with some money. The other example is, what if your municipality had its own currency with restrictions and advantages based on local needs? So here in Bergen, you often have low air quality during the winter. So what if you had restrictions on filling gas in your car, for example, on certain days? The last example is, what if every citizen had carbon rations every month, like a coupon for CO2 emissions? They could restrict the amount of meat you could buy, restrict how much you would be able to travel, and so on. Of course, the challenge with this is, I mean, this is very much in line with a lot of politicians these days that wants to push a green agenda and believes this is for the greater good of society. One thing I think they fail to take into account is that, well, what if we elect politicians that believe the complete opposite of that? What if we elect politicians that have an anti-green agenda? What if we have politicians that... So the idea here is he wants to impose restrictions on other people to push his agenda. But that also means that whoever you elect can use these tools to impose their agenda. And so it's very important that we have a system that does not allow for this kind of restrictions on everyday life. And we also have seen for the last couple of years how far people are willing to go in face of uncertainty and crisis. So when you have this opportunity, and when these tools available, there's really no limit to how far you can push this. And it was a bit funny as well, because I had a podcast on CBDCs last year, and I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, oh, you're going on a podcast, what are you going to talk about? I said, I'm going to talk about CBDCs. And he said, that's the latest conspiracy. And so I asked him, okay, what's the conspiracy? Well, the conspiracy is that the government can just shut off your money or decide what you're going to use your money on. And well, this is what it's supposed to do. Or this is one of the things it can do, rather. So is this a monetary system? Or is it a social credit system? The same thing we have been criticizing China for over the last decades. Yeah. So it's potentially a very scary path to go down. And the thing is, there are two roads we can choose. We can choose the road of freedom. The advantage of going down the road of freedom is then, let's say if Bitcoin fails, well, at least we'll be free to choose something else. If a CBDC fails, we will still be forced to use it. And so we should be very careful on what roads we decide to go down before those decisions are imposed on us. And on that note, thank you very much.
So, my talk is all about Bitcoin in Africa, as you can bloody see here. And the point was that Norway doesn't really need Bitcoin, something that Eric keeps talking about. But at the same time, Norway appears to really need Bitcoin because of all the banking crises that are going on right now. So, of course, the timing wasn't ideal. By the way, I'm going to be very general, and I'm going to stereotype a lot about Africa. I know that Africa is, hundreds of languages and 50-odd countries and lots of different sort of races, ethnicities, cultures, etc. We'll come on to that. But generally speaking, we're talking about the continent of Africa and why it needs Bitcoin. I'm going to be your host for this talk. My name is Joe Nakamoto on socials. Can anyone guess these flags in the bottom right-hand corner? Just shout out if you recognize any flag. Senegal, yes. Cape Verde, yes. Tunisia, yes. Morocco, yeah. And then Ireland, yes. Ivory Coast, correct. So why should you take me seriously? Because I really don't. I am a journalist, between these words, or a pretentious blogger, to steal Knut's insult of me. I write for this shitcoin publication called Cointelegraph. These things up here, the ETH, the BNB, SOL, they are shitcoins. Avoid at all costs. And I've been working there for the past couple of years. I've lived in actually 5 African countries. When I was 13, I moved to South Africa and spent 3 months living there. And that sort of inspired this love of Africa. And my job before Cointelegraph was working for Bloomberg. I'm really sorry. I used to write FUD about Bitcoin. And I'm a passionate sat spreader. One of the things I really like to do, and you'll see in a moment's time, is to send Bitcoin to people for their first time and to record their sort of reactions. And I speak all of Africa's dominant languages, because as a boy, I really wanted to be able to travel across the whole of Africa. So I speak English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. This is me at the... Senegalese people are really tall. Can you see me in this photo? I'm over here. This was Senegal's first ever Bitcoin meetup in real life, which was early last year. Prior to that, all their Bitcoin meetups had been virtual. And as you can see, Senegalese people are really tall. And yeah, it was also quite a diverse offering. This is Nourou, who was the founder of Bitcoin Senegal. Amazing guy, really inspirational. On the left here is, you'll never guess, a Senegalese central banker. So he turned up to the first Bitcoin meetup in Senegal. And you also had women there, which obviously, as we know, is quite a rarity at these Bitcoin things. So it Bitcoin meetups around the world, and especially in Africa. And then this was the team at Senegal's first Bitcoin conference in December of this year. Voila. Oh, and this is a little video, which I'm no idea if it's going to play or not, just to show what I do for fun. Is it going to play? Oh, no, it's not going to play. Shit. Yeah, there's no sound, though. I'm just, like, showing off that I give off sats to people. Yeah? Oh, you got speakers? This one? MacBook speakers. Oh, then I'll just hold my microphone to it. It's fine. It doesn't have it as a Mac. Macs hate tech. Okay, external headphones. Wicked. Where the fuck's my talk? Oh no. Here we fucking go again. Who was the guy that helped out a second ago? 4 fingers up. No, it's not done it. 4 fingers down? To the left, to the right? Oh no, it's not. It's not finding. I mean, quit that for a start. Alt-tab. Oh, this could be it. Are we good? I'm really sorry, everyone. I promise you I'm a professional. And is it playing? Yeah. Okay. Hey, it's Joe. I'm here in Gibraltar. We're going to talk to some people about Bitcoin in Biarritz. I'm in Amsterdam, Lugano. So I'm going to click pay. So you do Face ID, and then just like that, it's paid. Yeah, you now have €3.
Thank you.
Face ID, and just like that, you've received your first Bitcoin.
Are you kidding me? That's true?
Yeah, you've received your first ever Bitcoin. How do you feel?
Yeah, this is a very special moment.
We're in St. Lucia.
I'm in San Salvador.
Not bitch, Bitcoin. It's this symbol here, this B.
All right.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, man.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, buddy. So now you have €5, 2 cents, or 25,000 sats.
Okay.
Comment tu te sens?
Sure.
Yeah?
Thank you very much.
First Bitcoin now.
Thank you very much.
Yo.
Gracias.
Y gracias por su ya. Do you think they like digital currencies?
If they could eat it, maybe.
Okay. And then, just like that, you
Oh my
receive.
gosh, that's so cool.
Genuine reaction, right?
Yeah.
See you. High five. Okay, check
Bon
it out.
courage à vous.
Ciao, bonne journée. Au revoir.
Let's go.
Woo. So that's what I like to do. Thanks. Anyway, back to Africa. And there's a lot of Africa content coming out this year. I'm just looking for a new videographer. So yeah, as I was mentioning earlier, it's 2023 and you cannot generalize like that, but I'm going to do it anyway. So yeah, there's 1.3 billion people and 3,000 languages, so it's an incredibly diverse region. It's also one of the big handicaps for Bitcoin in Africa because a lot of people don't speak English, and 90% of the internet is in English. The average age is incredibly young, which I love about Africa. For example, the Senegalese Bitcoin conference, it was a load of teenagers running around saying, "Send me sats." Whereas if you look around the room here, no offense everyone, but the average age is probably 35, 40. So it's a really hopeful place for Bitcoin. However, the average salary is not $75, that's $750, sorry. GDP is 1.3 trillion. Quick question, which has a bigger GDP? California or Africa, the entire continent of Africa? California, correct. So that just goes to show how big California is and also how much Africa can still grow because it is just very impoverished still. And yeah, as I mentioned, 3,000 languages. The other thing that obviously Bitcoin fixes is the 4.5 average annual inflation rate in sub-Saharan Africa, in Zimbabwe, and in other awfully managed countries, the inflation rate is a lot higher. Does anyone know what this map means here? Has anyone seen this before? It does it for the whole world, but I thought for Africa it was quite interesting. Basically, it's a color gradient based on how much they hate Bitcoin. Red meaning it's completely illegal. Orange meaning it's now legal tender. So this here's the Central African Republic, who, if anyone here is from the Central African Republic, my visa is still waiting with you guys, so please let me into your country. And obviously green, South Africa is relatively crypto-friendly. Sorry, trigger warning, crypto. It's Bitcoin and crypto friendly. Some of the sub-Saharan African countries are quite crypto and Bitcoin friendly as well. So yeah, there you go. And then this was one of the first restaurants to accept Bitcoin in Senegal. And I think there's another photo. And this was the second one. I love the fact that they put the Bitcoin sticker on the fridge, because cold storage. Okay, so my Africa Bitcoin experience, as you've probably noticed, I love interactive quizzes and interactive presentations. Can you guess these countries? Just shout them out. Western Sahara, almost. Bit further north. Senegal, yep. Cape Verde, yep.
Tunisia.
Yep.
Morocco.
Yep.
And it's
The Ivory Coast, yeah, it was the flags that you saw earlier. I didn't want to make it too hard. So yeah. So when people talk about Bitcoin in Africa, I mean, very few people have used Bitcoin in every country in Africa, apart from maybe Paco de la India. Does anyone follow Paco de la India on Twitter? Really great guy to follow. Really inspirational. I really look up to him. So yeah, a lot of people in the mainstream media talk about the fact that there is a sleeping giant in Africa. And it was this bollocks phrase that got thrown around in the 90s and noughties. I generally think that we could now be seeing it with Bitcoin adoption. Nigeria has some of the highest stats for peer-to-peer remittance and is also a big haven for crypto trading. You have also mentioned peer-to-peer seems to be the way to go. If you want to get your hands on Bitcoin and crypto, the way to do it is through Telegram groups, WhatsApp groups, that sort of thing, because exchanges just aren't really there yet. Ray Yusuf from Paxful is making really big moves into Africa, but mostly it's Binance, which is obviously not good news. I had some amazing stats about remittance, which were on my notes app that you saw earlier. So if any of you can remember those stats, then that was what I was going to read out here. But I can't see it on the screen right now, so I'll tell you about it later over a beer. And yeah, of course, inflation sucks. You know, every country has double-digit inflation. It's wild. Okay, cool. Another quiz. Who are these famous African Bitcoiners? Shout out if you know. Ray Yusuf, nice. Bakar, Abu Bakar, yeah. From Nigeria. This fella. From Bitcoin Akazi. Ring any bells? Ah, so he founded Bitcoin Akazi, which is South Africa's sort of Bitcoin beach project. Really, really sound dude. Next up. Yeah, Farida Nabarema. So she is the reason why Afro Bitcoin started in Ghana this year. And the last one. You know this guy? KG? I can't pronounce his name correctly. I'm just going to call him KG. So he was the guy that introduced sort of sending Bitcoin over the SMS service. So you can text people Bitcoin. So you don't even need the internet to use Bitcoin. And finally, the most famous African Bitcoiner. Oh, wait, no, that's not him. Sorry. Sorry. Right, so Senegal and the CFA. The CFA is this horrific colonial relic that the French control. It's something I'm quite passionate about, and this is the Dakar Peninsula. Right now there are 8 places that accept Bitcoin in Dakar, which is more than Bergen, so I'm just saying. And basically the CFA is a currency that's controlled by France. They print it in France, they draw it in France. So literally there's some white guy sat in Clermont-Ferrand, which is just south of Paris, who's literally drawing palm trees and coconuts and, you know, African deserts that's used on a currency that's used thousands of miles away in the CFA region, which we'll come on to in a second. So France also has the first right of refusal for all exports for African businesses based in this region. And you also got a young, digitally native, mobile-friendly population in Senegal, and they're all fired up. I had a little documentary about this that came out recently about Senegal's Bitcoin scene. I'd really invite you all to watch it. And yeah, this is kind of why they're turning to Bitcoin, and others could too. Please feel to read some of my work about this. This is me up there. If you want to read some actually decent work about this, then I really invite you to read Alex Gladstein's piece about fighting monetary colonialism with open source code. And finally, yeah, the documentary I just plugged there. I'm trying to do a whistle-stop tour of the African countries I've used Bitcoin in, so sorry if I'm going a little bit quickly. So yeah, this is the region of the CFA. As you can see, I think it's 18 countries, is it? How many countries? I wrote it down. 14 countries, sorry. They all use the same currency, more or less. Here, it's the central CFA, and here's the Western CFA, but they're both pegged at exactly the same exchange rate to the euro. And as you know, the Central African Republic adopted Bitcoin, it's only a matter of time, in my opinion, until the others adopt Bitcoin, assuming that they do it in the right way and with the right levels of education in place. So yeah, was the CAR the first domino to fall? There's also a tremendous Bitcoin mining opportunity in sub-Saharan Africa. It has abundant wind, abundant sun and solar energy, and also the rivers that run there are just untapped energy. But one of the big issues is that they speak French. And most Bitcoin resources, shout out to Consensus, you guys do a fantastic job in translating resources into other languages, and notably tribal languages. This is something that really needs to be overcome. Okay, we're flying now to Cape Verde. This is where you have remittance, shitty banking infrastructure, and 3 currencies as well as a load of tourists. So these are 10 islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that I was with recently with my girlfriend for a couple of months, again trying to explore what Bitcoin can do for them. Double the population that live in Cape Verde live abroad. Has anyone been to Cape Verde? Yes. Canute? Guest sailing? Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's also really worth a visit. You can spend Bitcoin there. We'll get onto it. So they use 3 currencies all at one time: the euro, the scudo, and the dollar. So you can imagine the sort of the mind games that go on when having to manage all this, and also till management. How do you deal with change of euros, scudos, and dollars all at the same time? And also, yeah, 15% of the economy is remittance. So that means of that 15%, roughly 10% is lost to people like Western Union, MoneyGram, all these parasitic companies that really need to be obsoleted by Bitcoin. And here's some lovely pictures of Cape Verde. One of the reasons I went there is because there's a restaurant that accepts Bitcoin, spelt wrong, but that's fine. And I was wondering, okay, if there's one dude that accepts Bitcoin, surely there's a Bitcoin community there. There wasn't, but that's something we're working on. And it also has the most amazing beaches and waves. So if you're into surfing and that sort of thing, then do check it out. We're going to the Maghreb next. As you can see, this giant red thing here means that in Algeria, Bitcoin is more than banned. It's basically one of those things that's sort of you're punished for using. Morocco too, it's pretty illegal. So yeah, the Maghreb are salty no-coiners, but people still use Bitcoin. You can see this from the chain analysis stats about Bitcoin use in North Africa. But yeah, people still use it. The aversion to journalists is because I was there with Sophie, my partner, in Morocco last year, and I was trying to find Bitcoin stories in Morocco. No one would talk to me, because obviously I was going there as a journalist, so I couldn't actually bring these amazing stories about Bitcoin to the media. The one guy that did talk to me was a security guard working at I think it was the Ritz Hotel or something like that, in a really touristy resort. And I was like, oh, you use Bitcoin, this is cool. And he was like, yeah, I love to trade. I love to trade Bitcoins for shitcoins, this sort of thing. And that's one of the things that is really prevalent in Africa, or at least from my experience, is that most people are using Bitcoin to speculate, to trade, to make money. There's not a lot of people that are genuinely holding their own keys, that are running nodes and that sort of thing. So it's something that we really need to sort of educate on and spread the message about. Yeah, as I mentioned, yeah, it's a lot of trading groups, WhatsApp groups. But yeah, ultimately Bitcoin is for everyone, so we should keep that in mind. So I said that Bitcoin is illegal in Algeria. One of the videographers that puts the video content for me together, he lives there, and guess what I pay him in? Bitcoin. And guess what you can do right now if you want to? Do you want to send my videographer some sats? It would really make his day. So yeah, he accepts with Wallet Satoshi. He doesn't have a hardware wallet. This is something we'll come on to as well. But if you want to send him some sats, is it big enough on screen? You managed to scan it? Please send him whatever amount you will do. I'll shove the screenshot on maybe on Twitter later of his reaction and see how he thinks. I'm trialing out as a videographer right now. Can you do this with banks? No, thank you. You cannot do this with banks. Coming up towards the end of the presentation now, one of the big issues with Africa is, well, firstly, it's just a tough place to get shit done. Small anecdote here. At the Senegalese Bitcoin conference, we arrived at 9:15 for the first talk at 9 o'clock. And me and my friend Paco were a little bit hungover from the night before, but we were ready to go, had coffee in hand. And then we bump into Noru, the organizer. And we're like, oh, Noru, where is everyone? Because the conference hall was empty. No one had turned up. And he was like, well, yeah, the traffic's bad, isn't it? I was like, yeah, but they're going to get here in the next 10, 15 minutes, right? He's like, doesn't look like it. I was like, okay, so what are we going to do? He's like, well, I'm just going to push back the whole conference 3 hours. And I was like, wow, okay, why? And he's like, well, it's just Africa things, you know, like some people are just not going to get here in time, so we should push the conference back. So as a result, the conference started at midday rather than 9 o'clock in the morning. But can you imagine that happening in Norway, for example, or in Miami? You know, heads would roll. So this is just one of those things where you just got to roll with it, and you've got to take it as it comes. Buying Bitcoin is hard. I've touched upon this a little bit already, but mostly it's peer-to-peer and in trading groups, that sort of thing. I'd really try not to encourage people to buy Bitcoin through Binance, because I think that Binance is one of the sort of scourges of Africa. Self-custody is hard. Ledger are now considering shipping to West Africa, but it's still quite hard to do so. There are some self-custody wallets in Nigeria you can get your hands on. Trezor, I've been talking to them about trying to set up some sort of logistics connections with West Africa. But yeah, it's hard. And the other thing is education is hard. Oh, sorry. Education is hard because of it's all in English, and we need more local languages. One of the amazing things that the Bitcoin Senegalese community do is they translate everything into Wolof first. So Wolof is the language you speak at home, and then French, and then English. But they prioritize the language that the young people speak and the young people are most used to. And finally, yeah, cash is king. A lot of the time, you'll send someone sats, and they'll be like, so what? Like, I need the money in my hands. I need to feel it. You're like, no, it is money. And you're like trying to tell someone that it's money, but they've never... So to someone that's never used online banking before, that's never used a Visa or MasterCard transaction, how do you convince them that this thing you see on the screen is money? It's near impossible. So I think there needs to be a way of thinking about, okay, how can we visualize money better for people that just aren't going to get that Bitcoin is digital? For us, it's second nature now, right? We're used to sending texts, WhatsApps, messages, and now money. And for, a lot of people, they need to have that realization that Bitcoin is money. So and the other thing is just, patience. It's, we're in this for the long haul. And if we want, countries in Africa to adopt Bitcoin and start running with it, which is what I would love to see and I'd love to contribute to, then it's going to take a lot of time. I thought I'd just throw this out to Q&A in case anyone wants to ask a burning question at this point, because you've paid for a ticket to get here, and part of being at a Bitcoin conference is being able to just be in those. You're not on Twitter right now, so no one's going to dunk on you if you ask something a bit crazy. Do you have any questions? Yes.
What's the word on the CAR's adoption? Because I heard that they were doing metaverse kind of
Yeah.
with the adoption in parallel. Do you know what?
Yeah, so I actually did an essay about this recently, and I interviewed the guy that coded up the Sango coin project. So in the CAR, they adopted Bitcoin last year, and they basically took the El Salvador playbook, which is open to anyone to see. Tonga, for example, is looking at the El Salvador playbook and trying to work out how to implement it themselves. And CAR did the same thing. But CAR is one of the poorest countries in Africa, therefore one of the poorest countries in the world. And they're currently relying on loans from Dubai businessmen to pay the ministers that work in government. So they are close to sort of complete collapse, because the second you don't pay the ministers, then it's kind of game over. So they saw Bitcoin mining first as the opportunity. So did a lot of meetings in the Saudis, Middle East, to work out how can we get Bitcoin mining here. And instead they reverted to Bitcoin adoption. So they legalized Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And the Sango coin project came off the back of that because they wanted to find a way to get money into Central African Republic fast. And they saw that as an investment vehicle. So it's equivalent to the volcano bonds in El Salvador, but with a token and a shitcoin and a project. And I actually interviewed the guy and spent 15 minutes talking to him, and he's a Bitcoiner, and he was like, I hate that we have this project, but we need money, or we needed money 6 months ago. We need to have that investment into this country, because otherwise we literally cannot survive. And it's quite hard to fathom just how much debt they're in. But I know that the CAR was destroyed by Bitcoiners around the world because they didn't adopt Bitcoin. They adopted Bitcoin and shitcoins. But it's really hard to sort of understand the situation that we're in, and they were basically forced into this corner of we need this Sango coin project to take off in order for us to adopt Bitcoin properly. I've been trying to go to the CAR since they adopted it, but English people struggle to get in. If you're French, you can go into the country without a visa, but I can't. So yeah, I'd love to go there and actually work it out. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, that's good insight, good nuance.
Sweet.
It's easy to just, throw tomatoes at them.
Yeah. Oh, it's yeah. So Paco.
Working out, are they actually getting money
Not really. No. So you can join the Sango Coin Telegram group, and you can keep up to date with things. But already they've had a few people run off with some money. It's like, it's not just the poorest country in the world; it's one of the most corrupt. Paco, so at Run with Bitcoin on Twitter, he spent 2 weeks in the CAR, and he arrived, and there's one road that goes from the airport to like the accommodation, and then everything else is just dirt tracks. It's hard to get hold of water there, for example. It's quite hard to fathom the poverty that it's in. He has a video about it as well, and he goes around asking people, do you know what Bitcoin is? And obviously no one has any idea. So yeah, it's one of those things where, how can we put this country on the map, a bit like El Salvador is, but how can we also generate some income right now for the country? So yeah, I mean, I want to go there for myself and to see firsthand, but I'm also a bit like nervous because it's it seems to be like quite extreme, as a travel thing. Any other questions? Yes.
So you call finance the Scourge of Africa.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate a bit?
Yeah, for sure. So Binance obviously encourages sort of trading and crypto and that sort of thing. And while it pretends to, by the way, these are all just my opinions, but it pretends to educate people about Bitcoin, it actually really pretends to, it actually educates people about sort of speculation, leverage, and making sure you keep your coins with Binance. In Africa, they have billboards everywhere where it's like buy Binance, trade with Binance, and their marketing always leads with Binance, therefore crypto, rather than leading with Bitcoin, which is what I find a lot of the actual Bitcoin companies lead with. As you know, like I really respect Coin Corner in the UK, for example, and their whole thing is like Bitcoin, and then they'll put Coin Corner underneath it to promote the idea of like we're working towards this vision of a Bitcoin standard, not a crypto thing. And the other thing, which is a bit more tin-hatty, is you've got the Belt and Road Initiative with China, and you've kind of got like the Binance and Road Initiative, and that they're trying to get into these economies when they're still young and get people trading and get people using leverage or whatever, and then they're going to rug pull at some point. So there are some, Nauru, for example, in Senegal, he's creating his own Bitcoin exchange, because right now, with the places that accept Bitcoin, they all use BTC Pay server, and if they want to cash out, they have to go to him. It's very small scale, they're getting like a couple of transactions a week. So he can manage that liquidity, but he wants to build up a Bitcoin-only exchange there. It's called Banxas, so Banxas, and he's building that up at the moment. But when you've got as big bags as Binance, you can go anywhere, and most governments will roll out the red carpet for you and be like, yeah, of course, come to my country or whatever, pay some taxes here. One more question, or should I leave it there? Yeah? Awesome. Yeah.
So how can you bridge that easily from digital to money?
Exactly.
Bitcoin, how can you make that easy?
Yeah, so M-Pesa in Kenya was the sort of country that brought this mobile money to the fore, and then you've now got copycats in lots of other regions of Africa. So like in West Africa, it's Wave, like literally spelled like a wave, and you'll see the sort of label for Wave hanging in taxis and things, and you can just scan that QR code and pay. So nowadays when I'm talking about Bitcoin to people, I'll be like, it's just like Wave. And then funnily enough, I was there in Senegal during the World Cup, and I was having a drink with someone. I was talking about mobile money. He was like, oh yeah, I'm the head of business for like Senegal, Togo and Benin for Wave. And I was like, the hell? So I like quickly got my camera out, interviewed him, sent him some sats on camera. And he was like, it's quicker than mobile money and it's cheaper too. And I was like, yeah, get on board, So there is that, which is really cool, which could work in people's favor. But then at the same time, mobile money have physical locations. So like most street corners now, there'll be like an orange sign or a Wave sign or an M-Pesa sign where you can literally go and talk to someone about it. And that's one of the things that Bitcoin doesn't have. We don't have those physical locations, which is, again, why Eric putting this thing together and us having these meet space places is so important. Because, yeah, we can all live on the internet, but I think a lot of people need that. Oh, I can actually like buy some Bitcoin with some cash, put it on my phone, and then send it. I know it sounds like a step back, but sometimes you've got to take that step back to take this step forward. Do I have time for another question, or is that it? Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you for putting the focus on Africa. Maybe I want to tell a little personal story from the 2000s. before Bitcoin existed, and when I was a young man in Norway and wanted to change the world, like so many young people do. And I cared a lot about liberals and LGBT activists around the world. And in particular, I cared about Belarus, the last dictatorship in Europe, the last country with the death penalty, the last country where the KGB, without even changing their name, are still active. And in the 2000s, we did a big campaign where also Bergen was involved every year to collect money and support these underground, very legal opposition organizations in Belarus. Now, we had a problem that we discovered very quickly when we gathered all this money, which is that we can't send it to them. If we send that money, they land in jail immediately. Lukashenko has complete control over every transaction, everything that goes in and out of the country. So we would basically be condemning them to prison if we support them. So what do? I flew to Riga, took my cash into a machine, took out everything in cash, filled up a backpack, went to a secret airport, got myself in a tiny little propeller airplane, flew to a field outside Minsk, got picked up in a Lada on a dirt road, driven into Minsk, wait a few days to make sure the government isn't following you, then go to some secret meeting, give them the money cash in hand, then avoid talking to any beautiful women for the next 2 days, probably a government agent, which, by the way, first time I was there, first thing that happens is all these women still come up to me and talk in the bar, and I'm like, God, I'm a popular man here. Incredible. Never felt so handsome in my life. Until the people who invited me were like, we got to get out of here. This is not good. Anyways, today we send them Bitcoin, and that's the full story. Today we just send them Bitcoin. Boom. Den neste taleren vi har, er sannsynligvis den mest mystiske vi har. Jeg vet veldig lite om denne personen. Jeg aner faktisk hva han heter en gang. Vet ikke hvordan han ser ut. Aner ikke hva han jobber med sånn egentlig. Vet han fremdeles jobber i en slags Fiat-verden av noe slag. Men jeg trenger ikke å vite noen av de tingene om noen for å forstå hvilket kaliber de har. Og BTC for Freedom har vært aktiv og høylytt på Twitter over lang tid. Og inntrykket mitt av han var en person som jeg synes flere burde få høre på. Så jeg inviterte BTC for Freedom til å komme her og snakke til oss. Veldig, veldig spent på å høre deg in real person, in real life. Så velkommen til Northern Lightning, BTC for Freedom.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Eric. And thank you for hosting this event. What an amazing event. And I can't even imagine what this will do for Bitcoiners and for the world, this event. So many orange-pilled people here, or orange-pilling other people when they get home. So it's amazing. So I had some slides. I'm not sure if it's... And again, thank you so much for inviting me here, Eric, and for hosting. So my name is Bitcoin for Freedom on Twitter and on Nostra. And I'm going to talk about why I think Bitcoin is freedom money. So my background is from economy, Keynesian economy. So my background is the total opposite of what I'm going to talk about today. And also, why I think Bitcoin will create the freedom we need. And of course, there's 1,000 reasons why Bitcoin will create freedom. So I will just touch upon some of them. Of course, I can't stand here for hours. So the first reason I think Bitcoin is freedom money is because it's censorship resistant. And this means that, so a lot of the speakers today have talked about this. Martin, Joe, about how the governments can censor money using either CBDCs or, like we saw in Africa, shutting down the ability to use it. But still people are able to use it, as Joe mentioned. So it's impossible to censor it. We also saw China trying to shut down on mining, and mining just spreading to other places in the world. So I think this will this is key for freedom, because having a money, which is one of the most basic things you need for a society to work, to be uncensorable, that's key for having a free life as a human. And also this touches upon some of the things talked about, like Eric's example, flying into a rural place, having to drive with the cash. You know, Bitcoin is borderless, so it doesn't matter if the recipient is in a country that doesn't allow Bitcoin. You can just send it to them. If they have a dictator or a government that doesn't like Bitcoin, it doesn't matter. And also this will create more freedom for people having the chance to move through borders without having their money confiscated, since you can hold your seed phrase in your head, the 12 words in your head, which makes it impossible to confiscate. So you can basically take your wealth with you across borders. Usually people today are storing their wealth in stocks, real estate and gold. And that's impossible to take across borders without being confiscated if you're going to, if you have a bad time with the government you are going across borders with. And this one I think is very key, and it's very hot today. So we're seeing that the central banks turn on the money printer once again. So this has been a long time coming, because they printed a lot during COVID, so they shut down the economy and started to print to cope. And then, of course, they had to increase rates because of that. And they have been hiking rates without printing. But now, again, they started printing to save banks, but that printed money will not go into people's hands. So it will go into the banks, and probably also they will continue to hike rates. And then what happens is that people are left with no money at all, because they just inflate the money supply and bail out banks until people have no money left. So that's what, and that is not freedom. If you have to work your whole life and you end up with nothing because your money was inflated away, like we're seeing with a lot of people today having money in the bank. So let's say you put 500k in the bank. It says 500k, and a lot of people are used to, okay, but then that is the money. But when it's inflated, like we see today, that money eventually gets to no value. And I think having an inflatable money supply like Bitcoin is key to freedom, because you can do your work, store that money, that wealth in Bitcoin. And you know it will be there in 10 years, in 100 years, and you know it will have the same value or more. It will never go down in value, because there is no inflation after all the 21 million coins are produced. So you see here that the red line is the inflation rate. It goes down mathematically by each block. So it's not time involved here, it's blocks, but approximately 10 minutes are between each block. So now we're closing into block 840,000, and then inflation will go down. And we know exactly how much it will go down and approximately when it will go down. And this will go on until 21 million coins are produced, and that gives a high amount of predictability, which is also something that creates freedom for people, because they can focus on other things than having their money keeping its value. So yeah. And also this one I think is key for freedom, because it's peer-to-peer. There's no third party involved in a transaction. So this means that if a government doesn't like you, or you're doing something that the government does not agree with, they can't stop your transaction. You can transact with everyone in the world, and it goes directly to them. Just like when you sent money to Joe's friend in Africa, it didn't go through a third party there, right to him, straight to him, even though Africa or the government didn't like that transaction, it goes right through. So I think this is also key because you can basically move your money wherever you like and to whomever you want to and buy whatever you like. So this will take power out of the government and out of central control and give it to the people. And I think, of course, that gives freedom. So, yeah, all in all, Bitcoin is freedom money. It's decentralized, which is the main key. Decentralization is something we've not seen before in money form, and I think that's also the reason why it will change the world fundamentally. Thank you so much.
I love that. Thank you. Actually, this is great. I'm glad we go back to the, like, we get into Bitcoin and we know so much about Bitcoin. We kind of forget about the basics that, like, actually, yeah, we can talk about African currency union and all this kind of stuff that comes down the road once we have this. But this is the heart of it. We need to have borderless money. We need to have censorship resistance. We need to have heart-to-heart money. So thank you so much for that talk. Our next speaker takes it, I think, in a slightly similar direction, but on a completely different note. He is probably one of the world's leading Austrian economists. Who can raise their hand and tell me if they know what an Austrian economist is? Who has never heard of an Austrian economist? No, it does not mean you're from Austria. I will not tell you what it is. I think that is better for Raheem to do. But please, I cannot pronounce your last name, sorry. You have to do it yourself. But please welcome Raheem. So glad to have you here.
It's a pleasure. Thanks a lot, Raheem Tarizadigan. I'm not going to bore you, so I'm just telling you the other side. It's meant to be a child-friendly conference, but a bit of parental guidance will be needed, so I try to shock you a little bit. You know, like most of history, money was a tool for family relations. And it took basically two forms, bride money or blood money. So in the good old time, when community came first and not the individual. Of course, if you raped my daughter, no big issue, you can keep her. But you gotta give me the money thing to protect my honor. And if you kill my son, well, either you kill one of yours as well, or no big deal, you're gonna give me the money thing to at least leave me something to brag about if you take away my son who would have killed your sons and raped your daughters. There was a monetary system that was working quite well for most of human history, and that's what sociologists and historians of money usually concentrate on to prove how those fancy Austrian economists are all wrong about it. But it had its limitations, so we invented civilization, and with civilization everything changed. You rape my daughter, you kill my son, I gotta sacrifice at the temple, and I gotta pay the God King to protect his honor, so that we all can brag about how our God King is the mightiest and richest of all the God Kings around. And so it replaced money as a tool for tribal relations, with money as a symptom for societal relations, and it made possible larger societies on a larger scale. And we needed to have educated people. Economists appeared on the scene, and of course they had to look at money in a more impersonal, standardized way, and they had all their fancy ledgers. So when your daughter got introduced into civilization, they would look up in the ledger and they would tell you with mathematical precision, the value of one slave girl is 4 cows, but only if she's pretty. Otherwise it's 3 cows. And then, with all the cow dung and cow blood accumulating in the financial centers of the time, was a bit of a hassle. So they figured out something else. They checked on their ledger. They made some stargazing, totally scientific observations, and they deduced with mathematical precision that actually that shiny nugget you may find somewhere is actually the sun metal, and just about precisely the size of a nugget that fits into the palm of your hand it has exactly the value of 4 cows. And so for all the gold bugs around here, that's actually the historical gold standard. It says 1 gram of gold gives you a 130th of a slave girl. So that worked quite well for quite some time. That's the historical gold standard. It was a monetary system. But of course, you always have those enemies of civilization. And it was the first time, actually, in the high civilization that it invented all this ledger keeping and writing, that the first time a word appeared in print, and it's a word that's now translated as freedom, but the literal meaning of it was amaji, and it meant return to the mother. And there you see all this reactionary thinking, of course. Imagine a slave girl exchanging her position as a servant for the god king to go back to her filthy Stone Age mother and back to the tribe. So that's the kind of opposition to civilization we've always had. I don't know why I was asked to talk about this thoroughly discredited line of thought. No expert of any scientific standing does take it seriously anymore. It's this Austrian School of Economics tradition. And they more or less look through the eyes of the slave girl and say, yeah, probably for her, it's more important if she really wants to go back to her mother to keep a secret from the God King and to conceal something from the God King. Potentially what she's interested in is not what is imprinted on the solar precious metal. It's not the face of the God King that she's interested in. She's interested in that she can bury it, that she can dig it up, and it's still as good as new. And eventually, if the authorities are onto her, of course, for keeping secrets, she may try to take it with her, and she may indulge in the horrible crime of smuggling and get away from civilization. And it's particularly that kind of perspective which has been so pernicious, and I say it's thoroughly discredited. To give you an example, now until fairly recently, a silver coin, an Austrian silver coin, circulated in Africa. It was the Maria Theresian thaler. And now, without doubt, scientific experts in sociology have of course found out why it circulated that widely and for such a long time. And they remarked that on the print, the mint on the coin, it has Maria Theresia, the queen. It's her bust. And she has quite impressive bosoms. And obviously, that's a sign that the Africans understood in terms of fertility cult. So that's, of course, the reason this coin circulated that widely. Now, these racist and sexist Austrian economists, of course, denied the femininity and debased this coin by just looking at the material value and actually claiming that the reason why these coins circulate is one of the very few silver coins of which the weight and fineness has never changed throughout history. I mean, now look at something as reactionary as that. And then, unfortunately, this traditional thought, I mean, in the past, there may have been some arguments for that because the past civilization had their limitations. For example, when Bergen was ruled by savages, long before it has become civilized as it is today, it was these degenerate merchants who would just accept any coin, no matter who was minted on it. Imagine that. I mean, no matter what kind of god king was on the coin, they didn't care. What they cared about was just the weight and fineness of the coins. That was their standard. That was the standard, actually, of the Hanseatic League monetary standard. Why was it the case? Because, of course, these degenerates, instead of putting their goods onto a ship and shipping them to the palace of the god king, they just shipped them around, landing in the hands of some random plebs. I mean, just imagine the waste of energy, the waste of wood for all this shipping going on. It just takes one ship to bring it to the temple or the palace, but they cut down forests. The environmental impact was terrible, and most probably they are to blame for climate change as well. So not at all ESG compatible business that happened here in Bergen in the uncivilized times of past. So as I said, in history, maybe you could have found some arguments for that crazy line of thought, which is thoroughly discredited. But then the system became perfected by a new kind of theory. It's called MMT, which stands for Mongol Monetary Theory. And the Mongol Monetary Theory really solved most of the problems of civilization. You know, the Mongols, they took over the Chinese territories. The Chinese had invented paper and printing, and they were even dabbling in paper money. But only the Mongols finally solved the trust issue of paper money. You are not accepting that script of Mongol paper for payment? What is the solution? Off your head. No more trust issue. It became universally accepted. Now that's the textbook definition, as everyone who studied economics know. Universally accepted unit of money, not like Bitcoin or something. So the Mongols really fixed it there. But it didn't stop there. They also pursued the right economic policy, which had to go hand in hand with the right monetary policy, of course, as every expert knows. You could not just produce those Mongol papers, because everyone knows that's a horrible crime of counterfeiting and off your head. So you got to get those Mongol paper money somehow. How? Why do you need to get them? Well, easy thing. You got to pay your taxes to the Mongols. And of course, that's a horrible, horrible crime to not pay your taxes off your head. And what did it solve? I mean, it solves really the incentive problem. You all know the incentive problems with slaves. They really don't want to work. I mean, you've got to kick their ass constantly. You've got to monitor them. It's a hassle. The Mongol monetary theory really fixed it, because now everyone has to scramble to toil and get some of that Mongol paper money, go to the market, produce something, and increase GDP. So since then we've got growth, we've got civilization. Of course, the Chinese under Mongol rule had an economic boom. GDP went through the roof until some crazy revolutionaries went against the Mongols, and they outlawed paper money and went back to a Stone Age kind of living together relations. So it's this thoroughly discredited kind of thought that argues that actually the main function of money would be for the crazy misfits, the dissidents, to do something that goes against consent, where everyone knows it's foolish. Maybe it's not illegal, but it should be illegal. It definitely should be illegal. And they are looking at money only for these objectifying, in a way, materialist functioning of how are you able to conceal that wealth. And of course, it's totally immoral to steal from the God King, which means keep money to yourself or wealth to yourself. So because it's totally immoral, you have to conceal it. And if the authorities are after you for concealing it, you have to smuggle it someplace. Yeah, it's this kind of thought that actually claims, and it's really ridiculous, that slavery is not freedom, even though we know slavery perfected by Mongol monetary theory leads to GDP growth and civilization, everything we love and cherish around us. They actually claim that freedom is freedom. How odd. So I'm sorry I won't tell you too much about this tradition today. If you're interested, yeah, you'd really have to leave civilization, I think, to get back to that line of thought. I think that's basically everything you have to say about Bitcoin. It's probably the money of the enemies of civilization. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much. All right, guys. We have one final speaker, and then we're going to take a lunch break. Just informing you now in advance. A couple of things that I want you to know before the lunch starts, because when the next speaker ends, you will all be eager to get out of here. So, first of all, merchandise. We have some really awesome shirts. They're homemade. There's like everything with Bitcoin. We built the payment system in our basement. It's running on a server that we made. We have terminals that are 3D printed at Christian's home. There is no company, no organization, no third party involved in this conference at all, including how we produce the merch. Made with printers in our basement, standing there for 3 days sweating. So, there's only 10 items left of each kind. Far less than there are people here. So if you would like to have a memory from the very first Northern Lightning Conference ever, and to be able to prove that you were actually there when it all started, I would recommend that you go and check out our little merch shop outside. That is also where we will be doing book signings for Knut and others, and Martin. Consensus Network is here with a lot of cool books about Bitcoin if you just want to learn more. Not all of the authors are here, of course, not this year anyway. But yeah, that's a great way. And then I have to come to a personal recommendation. You will find a little kid out there called Mikkel, sweet boy. And he is so entrepreneurial, so smart, brilliant, brilliant kid. So he decided he's going to churn his own coffee. And he found a farmer in El Salvador, with his dad, of course. And me and his dad went to El Salvador together. And he went out and visited the farmer and made a deal with him. This is a year and a half ago. It takes time to make coffee. Paid him in Bitcoin, made an order. The farmer grew the coffee and sent it to Norway. And they burnt it together and they packed it in 21 bags of coffee that's standing out there. And I really recommend that you all support this kid. That's really, really, that's so cool. So that's all about the merch. The lunch is very small, because it's really expensive to buy lunch for people at conferences, it turns out. But there will be some bread and some fruit and the stuff that you see up along the wall outside. I hope it's sufficient and enjoyable. That was all I wanted to achieve. Okay, we have a final speaker from one of our sponsors. And Sam Ackerman is from BitRefill. And we have two, I suppose I should say this, we have two great sponsors for this event. Two really, really great sponsors. And I don't just say that, like there's lots of Bitcoin companies that want to support these kind of things, they're up and coming, whatever. These are really, really great companies. Like BitRefill has really changed the game on how you spend your Bitcoin. And it's very well thought of and established around the world. And I'm so proud and happy that you guys are supporting this event. It's really, really cool. I've been to a few of the other events you guys support, and it's always awesome. So the fact that you guys were willing to join me on this journey is just, for me, a huge vote of confidence. So thank you for that. And Pocket Bitcoin. Pocket Bitcoin, fantastic app to buy Bitcoin. No registration, no verification. Up to 1,000 euros you can buy every day without nobody knowing who you are. And of course, non-custodial. There's no FTX that's holding your Bitcoin or bullshit. It's in your wallet. The moment you buy it, to your wallet. How it should be. So, check out our sponsors, check out our merch, and without further ado, here's Sam Ackerman.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. And great arrangement over such a short amount of time. I'm very impressed. So yeah, my name is Sam Kurtzen. I work for BitRefill as the project coordinator. I have an academic background in philosophy and economics, so specifically Austrian economics. Always fun to meet others. So yeah, I'm going to start off with a simple question. Why Bitcoin? Why are we here today? What's the value of Bitcoin that we find today? I would say I can talk about my own preferences, why I'm a Bitcoin advocate, why I love Bitcoin. It's very based on the ideological aspect of Bitcoin. As we've heard, the evil central banks, a cracking system, that it's about to probably fall apart, and we see Bitcoin as a solution to this, that will fill this empty void and make the individual freer in the end and protect our property rights to a greater extent that we have our property rights protected today. So this is still a very visionary approach. I find the value of Bitcoin today thanks to the vision I have about how the future will develop and where Bitcoin fits into the picture. And I probably dare to say that I'm not the only one here who value Bitcoin thanks to this aspect. But sure, it was great to see the eagerness yesterday among you guys to pay with Lightning and wanting to participate in the using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange and not only to store your savings in and hope for it to actually become realized and mainstream. But then we have other people within the Bitcoin community who uses Bitcoin for a different reason and find value in Bitcoin for other reasons than ideological aspects, where even ideological aspects aren't even part of their interest. They use Bitcoin for its utility as a tool to help them in their everyday life, to make it more convenient for them to live. Some of these are, of course, ideologically driven in terms of that they find Bitcoin as the best tool to actually protect their property rights and privacy and so forth, as a tool to opt out from the current system. Then we have others who don't necessarily care about central banks or anything like that. They just want to live their life or more utility to their life, and they use Bitcoin for it. So, for example, where we have financial censorships or tyrannical governments trying to hinder forex trading or movement over borders of money or physical goods. Or if you're fully excluded from the banking system, which is like 1.5 billion people in the world, in Africa, South America, even in the US, illegal immigrants doesn't necessarily have a bank account. These people who uses Bitcoin within this group, they're not driven by ideology or the vision of a failing central banking system. They find the value of Bitcoin today thanks to its utility. And I see some discrepancies here, they're not contradictory at all. The opposite, we need both. But there's some sense of lack of empathy at times and communication and understanding of these different approaches to the value of Bitcoin. And I want to give an example where this is, which really sheds light on it. These dynamics, and which in the end has played out very well. So, the industry I'm thinking of is the VPN industry. So it started with very similar roots as Bitcoin did, an ideological foundation based on, I would say, classical liberal ideas where the individual is sovereign, and we also want to be sovereign and protect our property rights online, on the internet. Though at the meantime, in the late 90s, some businesses were also using VPN purely for its utility to create private communication channels within companies, that sort of thing. And today, what's VPN today? It's mainstream. It's definitely widely adopted and reached mainstream adaptation. But the person out here on Bergen Street who uses VPN, do they care about privacy or the political ideology which was sort of the foundation of the industry? No, they probably just want to watch US Netflix. They want to circumvent geolocks online because it brings them more utility. They can watch series that they want to watch. So in some sense, the ideological aspects of VPN has been disconnected. It's still there, of course, but it's a small minority probably of VPN users today who actually uses it due to its privacy utility, or they have the ideology in mind. And I would say we're in the same situation with Bitcoin. It hasn't, of course, not made any widespread adaptation yet on a large international scale, but hopefully we're heading there. Yeah, but with VPNs, in the end, does it really matter that the ideology has sort of been left behind among the general users? I would say no. It's not a big deal, because they're still using this tool that protects their privacy, even if they're aware of it or not. And they are, by their actions, by these new customs that they've developed, new behavior, they've actually started to adopt this technology that protects or limits the government or any other overseer to interfere in their life. So they've started to act in a more freedom-leaning way, even if they're aware of it or not. Yeah, so there is no easy answer to how we reach hyper-Bitcoinization or to get it mainstream. But we should definitely not forget the division here between people who don't want to hodl They are not invested in Bitcoin to hodl. They actually want to spend it, use that money as money. And the ideological approach, which I think is the most prevalent one here in the West, is also super important to lay a theoretical foundation for it. So yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Are you having fun? I am enjoying myself so much. This is incredible. Guys, we're going to move over to a more practical part of all of this because it's fun to learn about why Bitcoin and understand Bitcoin, all this kind of stuff. But we got to use Bitcoin, build Bitcoin, be Bitcoin, you know? And there's lots of ways to be Bitcoin. You've all tried some of the easiest ways, like buy some Bitcoin. Have it in your own wallet. It's a pretty cool one, common one. But Bitcoin is censorship resistant, peer-to-peer, borderless for a reason. And that is because we can all run it at home. We don't need, the payment system here is run from a basement, right? So how is that done? What can you do to become a part of Bitcoin and to be part of building the system? Sounds scary and dangerous and difficult. It is not. It's really user-friendly and fun. So to illustrate that, our first speaker is Fish Banana. He is an absolute legend in the Norwegian Bitcoin community, one of a group of people who have developed and worked on our Node Nord project, which has become, I believe, one of the largest Lightning mesh networks in the world. And yeah, here to talk about how to run your own node.
Thank you. So I'm going to do a demonstration on how one can run their own node. I will show it, and my choice for the node software will be Umbrel, because of the simplicity of it. It is you have a lot of different options when you want to run a node, and you can do it in a multiple of ways. But I think when you are just curious to get started, then the best way is to just run with Umbrel and play around with it and just get familiar with the software and how everything works. And you can play around connecting it to your wallet and all these kinds of things. So here is a server that I have hosted in the cloud just for the session. It's not the recommended way to do it. I would recommend to always run the node on some local hardware that you own yourself. But just for the simplicity of this demonstration, I will just do it on a web server. And I'm going to show how easy it is to just install Umbrel. And I start by going to the GitHub page of Umbrel, which looks like this. And I scroll a little bit down, and I choose my option, and I have installed a Ubuntu server, so I will choose this option. Then I will copy this command, and we try to paste it here. Didn't copy right, so we will try again. And now the server is starting to install Umbrel. And in a few minutes it will be finished, but I have cheated a little bit. So I made one from before. And then you will get into something like this, which is how it can look when you have when it's finished installing. And here you have, you can see I have the Bitcoin node app. And you're basically up and running. You have your node. So it can be that simple. And then you can also add other things like Lightning. You can add Lightning channels. And also in Umbrel, you can do a lot of other things if you want. I personally do not like to mix. I like to don't run a file server, for example, on the same hardware that I run my Bitcoin node. But you can do it through Umbrel like this. And you can also run, for example, a Nostr relay. Then I could just search like this. And I can install here. And in a little while I will have a Nostr relay for those that are aware of Nostr. So it's just to show that to run a node and all these things doesn't really have to be that difficult. It's quite simple. Of course, you can do it like a lot more difficult. You can do choices which makes it more complicated. You can customize it any way you want. You can basically do anything, but again, then it's complicated and it's not that easy. So if you want to run a node, you're new to it, then I'd recommend maybe try a Umbrel, play around with it, see how it feels, get to know the system. And then when we go here again, for example, you can go to the Bitcoin node. This is the one I set up a little bit earlier, and you see it's now syncing the blockchain, which you will have to do the first time you set it up. And this will probably be working for some days to fully sync. And after that's done, you can just use it. And also you have here you see the hash rate that was the actual hash rate at this block height that the node is synced to currently. And you see the block it's at is the ones you see here at the left. And then you also have advanced settings where you can play around with a little bit more custom settings if you want. And you can, for example, if you don't have that much storage space, you can choose here and prune the blockchain. So it means that you don't have to store the entire blockchain, because that is around 500 gigabytes, and maybe you just have a PC with 30 gigabytes. Then you can choose this setting, and then it will download all still, but it will delete. Like when it gets to 38 gigabytes of storage, it will delete the oldest continuously. But I of course recommend having the full blockchain downloaded, but it is an option. And we can see. Yeah, I'm going to save that for you. So we can click it, and then you can explain on the next one. And here we can see, now the node, I set the command to install Umbrel at the beginning of the talk. Now it's finished. So I can then just go here, and we can see how that looks like. So as you see, it didn't take that long to get started and get the node running. And when you install it the first time, this is what it will look like. You just put in your name, we'll just put a random name. And then you put a password.
I think he used
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, we can do that.
Practical question. If I forgot my password, and I don't know how to get it in a reset. What do you recommend? I got it for a friend.
When you create a node, you will also have the option to write down the seed phrase of the wallet. And if you have that, I'm quite confident that it's possible to restore it. I do not know perfectly myself, like at this moment, how to do it, but I'm sure it's possible. And if you reach out on, for example, if you're in the Discord server, I'm active there and I can try to help you, or something like that. So yeah, here is the node when I first installed it, like the one we just set up. And you can then choose all your apps. And like Nista is going to talk about soon, you can also install the app for BTC Pay Server, which you can do a lot of fun things with. And yeah, that's basically it, to show that it's not hard to set it up, and you can do a lot of customizations if you want. But start easy, and play it slow, don't rush things, and reach out if you have any questions, or ask now, for that matter. Yeah.
I noticed that it said powered by Bitcoin Core. I've heard, I'm not a developer, so forgive me, my language is directed, but I've heard that there's different implementations like Bitcoin Knots, BTCB. Why would someone create an implementation? Why would a developer choose to use certain implementations over others? Is that too big of a factor?
I think it's a little bit out of my knowledge, but I don't really have a good answer on it. But you can run different implementations if you want. I personally don't see a good reason for running multiple. I personally prefer that we only run on one implementation, even though that's not how it's done. But I think the the common thing to do is to run on Bitcoin Core, even though you can run on all the other stuff as well. Like everything is compatible. But yeah, it's like you can change small topics. Like it's a little bit different. It's my understanding of it. But maybe Peter he knows a lot about it, I think. So yeah.
So is there a way to verify the binary that you download? You download something to curl and you run it. Can you kind of verify whatever it's downloading with the copy?
Yeah, you can also just go to Bitcoin's GitHub page and compile everything yourself. Yeah. But that's a more complicated way to do it. But you can build it from scratch if you want and you have the knowledge for it. But for this demonstration, I chose the simple way to band down. Here you're kind of trusting Umbrel. But I compiled everything myself on my node.
I think there is a signature file, so you can verify.
So yeah.
How you can print the ledger to synchronize the whole ledger?
The pruning you what I'm thinking about. This. You think this setting here, right? Yeah. So basically, the blockchain is around 500 gigabytes. But if you don't have a 500 gigabyte hard disk in your PC, when you start, like now, I have set this to 38 gigabytes. So now it will, it's syncing, and you see so far it's gotten to 11 gigabytes. And when we get to now 39 gigabyte, it will delete the first gigabyte that you downloaded. You don't need everything, but you need the whole UTXO set, if I'm correct. But you don't need every signature and there are some parts of the blocks that you can prune, and this is the data you delete. It's called SPV node, I think is the right term for it, when you prune it. But it works the same. It does most of the same actions, but it's not exactly the same. Like it's some possibilities you lose. So I recommend to run, of course, the full blockchain and just have the full 500 gigabytes and upgrade accordingly. Yeah. But even if you prune, you still have verified everything. You just deleted the old stuff. Yeah, you're still helping because you're always verifying the new stuff. It's just the old things that are maybe a year old or something. It depends, of course, on the size you prune it to. Jeg tror da så ville du sikkert synkronisert på nytt. Jeg har ikke et godt svar her nå. Yes? Yeah, I think that's possible. Only issue I can think of right on top of my head is if it's I'm not 100% sure on this, but if it's an old transaction you're trying to, like if the UTXO is from 2014, for example, then you have pruned away that part. But I think you still have the UTXO set, I think. Even with the pruned node, so you should be able to do it either way. So it's still possible. Okay. It's my matter, and if that's wrong, anyone is free to correct me.
No, I think it's right. But just maybe we should clarify that by using a pruned node, you're still providing utility to the Bitcoin network. People can download transactions and blocks from you still. They just can't download every block.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any more questions? Yeah.
The hash rate, is that the global hash rate on that block?
Yeah. So at this time that you see on the left. Yeah, so now today 940 tera hash is not that much. But yeah. So yeah, then we can do the next one maybe if there's not any more questions. Are you next, Peter? Or yeah.
All right. I hope that was useful. Thank you to Fish Banana. I'm sorry I wasn't here to send you off, but that was great, I'm sure. The next speaker is truly a legend. He has been a Bitcoin developer for many years. He calls himself a cryptomancer. Put your cryptochronomancer. Somebody have a conversation with him later tonight about what the hell that means. He is also a legendary shitposter on Twitter and a passionate full RBF advocate. So here to explain to us what the hell that is and how it connects to what we just learned is Peter Todd.
Thank you. So, you know, I want to go start by saying, like, our previous presenter did go show the ultimate end goal of this, which is how to go click that button which says, you know, full RBF transaction replacement on all the time. So frankly, I mean, you know, anyone here who, like, trusts me and, you know, just wants to go and leave, I don't know, maybe find some coffee or something, feel free to go. I mean, you know, well, we'll come back later. It's no big deal. But, you know, if you're a true Bitcoiner, your ethos is don't trust, verify. So you're going to have to go sit through and listen to me explain what the heck is this thing and, like, why should I turn it on? So let's go start with, well, what is transaction replacement? And to explain that, well, you kind of got to ask, I mean, transaction replacement, like, can't you, like, not replace Bitcoin transactions? I mean, isn't the whole point I send you money and I can't get it back? Yes, that is true, but, you know, when you create a Bitcoin transaction, first you go and send it to your peers, and it hangs around in other transactions mempools. Well, what does that really mean? Well, I create a transaction, I give it to that guy goes and gives it to his buddies give it to his buddies, and so on. And very quickly it's got into as many people who will accept it. And eventually, at some point, miners will go and, if I pay enough fee to be competitive, mine that transaction. And the purpose of transaction replacement is often you want to, after you've sent the transaction, after it's sitting in mempools around the internet, you want to replace it with a different transaction. Well, why might you want to do that? You know, here's an example from, I think it's Blue Wallet, if I remember correctly. And that's a UI on Android, a little hard to read, but it says at the bottom, bump fee and cancel transaction. Well, there's two examples where you might want to replace one transaction with another. First of all, I send money to the wrong person, and I say, well, you know, I don't really want this to happen again. I can replace the transaction with the transaction that sends all the money to me. Spends the same input, but the money goes back to me. Obviously, that's useful sometimes. Now, because Bitcoin is a decentralized system, this isn't guaranteed to work. I'm just telling miners, hey, could you please go and mine this transaction which sends the money back to me rather than this transaction which gives my money away. And then the other one there is bump fee. Well, what do we mean by bump fee? Increase the transaction fee. Why might I want to do that? Well, just the other day I was selling some Bitcoin off at an in-person Bitcoin exchange who wanted a confirmation, and it wasn't getting mined. So I replaced one transaction with another with a higher fee. And, 5 minutes later got mined. Pretty simple there. But again, it's not a guarantee. I am giving miners a request, please mine this transaction rather than this other one. And what's interesting is, really early on, transaction replacement existed in Bitcoin. I mean, this is code from the earliest version I could find, which is probably like version 0.1 point something or another. I never got around to getting 0.1.1, but that's basically what it is. And it's code saying, is a transaction newer than? Well, what's the definition of newer than? What did Satoshi come up? This whole crazy thing about end sequence numbers, and don't feel bad if you can't understand this. All it really was is transactions way back when had a field called end sequence, and it was just a number. And the logic said, well, we should replace one transaction with another if the number's higher. Seems simple enough. The problem is that number is 32 bits. You can replace 4 billion times, and 4 billion replacements is a whole lot of bandwidth. So this was a terrible idea. And I've got to remind you, like, Satoshi wasn't perfect. I mean, Satoshi created a whole lot of stuff that was a really bad idea. In fact, a really funny example of this is, you may have heard this idea of, and this was in the Bitcoin white paper, Bitcoin, longest chain wins. That is fundamentally wrong, and it doesn't work. You know, even that Satoshi got wrong. It's actually the chain with the most work. But I digress. But, you know, that's yet another one of Satoshi's mistakes. So how do we fix this? How do we, like, align incentives? How do we, you know, get rid of this DOS attack? Well, replace by fee is a great idea. It says more money is good. And that means that the replace by fee logic says, well, why don't I just mine the transaction that pays more money? Simple enough. You know, the actual rules are a little more complex than this, but that really is basically what it is. You know, why would I replace one transaction with another? Because the other transaction pays more money. That's exactly what the bump fee thing does. It's exactly what the cancel transaction thing does. You know, if I cancel a transaction with RBF, I'm saying, hey, miners, mine this one instead because you'll get more money out of it. Now, the guy who originally wanted that money might not be very happy with it, but, you know, it's an unconfirmed transaction. That's my prerogative. And for the most part, that's how Bitcoin currently works. But there is a catch. And that catch is the crazy idea of buying coffee with Bitcoin in person on chain. Now, I don't know if you've looked at Bitcoin transaction fees right now, but if you send an on-chain transaction, it's, you know, like 50 cents. Now, some parts of the world, buying coffee costs like 20 bucks. So, you know, if you're in Switzerland, you can ignore this little statement here. But, you know, most parts of the world, buying coffee is still pretty cheap. And a 50-cent transaction fee doesn't make any sense. But for a while, there were a lot of people who thought Bitcoin could scale indefinitely on-chain. There wasn't Lightning. And this was a really popular idea that you could go have instant transactions, and they would settle on-chain. Well, blocks are every 10 minutes, right? Obviously, you're not going to wait 10 minutes. So for a while, Bitcoin had this thing where transactions would not be replaceable. Like this end sequence thing that I mentioned earlier, that got deleted because it just doesn't work, and RBF came later. So for a while, if I sent a transaction out, you know, your node, if it saw another transaction, it didn't matter what what fee it paid or anything, it just wouldn't accept it. And this gives kind of a sort of sense of security, because it looks like the network is preventing double spends. In practice, this doesn't work very well, because the network's kind of an unreliable thing. Like, you know, if I go send this guy a transaction, if I go send this guy a transaction, but they're different transactions spending the same inputs, well, what miners are going to get what transaction? It's a really complex thing, and it's not necessarily going to be the transaction the merchant thought they were going to get. You know, and you can play games trying to go and detect this by detecting a whole bunch of people at once, et cetera, but none of this really works very well. So for the most part, Bitcoin devs have said, well, you know, this idea is kind of crazy. Like, you're just going to, if you don't want to trust your people paying you, you just got to wait for confirmation. And, you know, anyone who's been around Bitcoin a while has probably heard, you got to wait for confirmation. Unconfirmed transactions, you know, they're not confirmed. That's the whole point of the blockchain. But we did want these RBF things, so created this, like, political compromise. And, you know, in this case, we reuse the send sequence field to say, well, all right, some transactions opt into replacement, other ones don't. You know, and the nuance of this rule here really doesn't matter, but that was the basic idea. So that's all well and good, but there's a catch. More recently, people started doing multi-party transactions. You know, coin joins are an example. What is a coin join? Well, in something like Wasabi, you have hundreds of people putting in inputs to one single transaction. And with CoinJoin, the idea is, well, all these inputs go into one transaction, you get a whole bunch of outputs, and you can't figure out which outputs map to which input. It's a really useful thing. You also get Lightning, where certain types of Lightning channels with multiple parties funding them, you have multiple people contributing inputs to a single transaction. More advanced versions of Lightning. We have things where, like, when the Lightning channel closes in certain cases, again, you have multiple people with inputs for a single transaction, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if you can't replace a transaction, and also mempools are reasonably full, like they are right now, you have a problem, which is, you know, let's suppose I create a coin join with everyone in this room. Now let's suppose one of you guys goes and double spends your transaction with, you know, your input with a low fee. If that transaction gets to miners, those miners, if RBF isn't enabled, they will just look at the transaction and let it sit there and wait till the fees have dropped low enough that it will get mined. Right now, that could take, you know, weeks. I mean, it could take indefinitely. There really is, you know, no guarantee any transaction will get mined. It's purely a bidding system. So this causes a lot of problems that are solved by having replaced by fee. Replaced by fee, it's a very simple situation. That low fee transaction, well, the coin join paid more money, so surely you would mine the coin join instead. Or in the opposite case, well, the double spend paid more money. All right, so the coin join gets canceled, but at least then we move forward, and now everyone else can try another coin join. And you know that you have to try another coin join because you saw in the blockchain itself a spend of one of those inputs. It's a very easy thing to go and do. You know, decentralized wallet really has no way of knowing what's in miners' mempools. You can try to guess based on what transactions you've seen, but you really can't know because those mempools are inaccessible to you. You know, you have no visibility into them other than what gets into blocks. So, long story short is, about a year ago, people said, all right, you know, full RBF makes sense. Do replace by fee all the time. You know, we'll add this like flag to Bitcoin Core, and people start experimenting it with all well and good. And that did get merged, and Bitcoin Core version 24 and above has that. But in the process, there was a bit of kerfluffle about it, and this was talking about something called pinning attacks. And the idea was, well, you know, pinning attacks makes this kind of useless, and you shouldn't go and do this full RBF thing, because et cetera, et cetera. Well, this I think is kind of where I may get a little more technical, and I think this is kind of interesting because it's still fairly easy to understand. Like, if you want to go and have transaction replacement by which transaction pays more money, it's not quite so simple because Bitcoin is divisible into a very small amount. So certainly if I go pay just a tiny little bit more, you know, one single more Satoshi with transaction 2 versus transaction 1, is it really worth it to rebroadcast that transaction? Well, that's one of the rules that, you know, is in it. Like, you got to go pay at least enough to make it worthwhile to have the whole network use up network bandwidth broadcasting this replacement. Also, like, there's nuance where, you know, maybe one transaction pays more Satoshis per byte than another, but the absolute amount of money was less. You know, if I'm trying to replace a really big transaction with a lot of bytes, it might not be worth it to replace that transaction with one that'll pay more dollars per byte, because how are you going to account for the fact that, you know, the network bandwidth was already used? You know, and there's a whole bunch of like nuance here. And another one at the very bottom there is, well, the Bitcoin Core code base isn't that good. You know, right now, a lot of the algorithms about replacement just don't scale very well. So we have this arbitrary limit, which is, well, you're not allowed to replace more than 100 transactions per once, because, I mean, our code can't really do that properly. If you have a huge string of transactions with thousands of transactions depending on another, we can't compute how much they go pay in total. So there's this arbitrary limit. And transaction pinning is about exploiting all these little things. One of the big ones being, of course, that arbitrary limit. You know, if you're part of that coin join and you want to screw over intentionally the other coin joiners, you can go and create a string of 100 transactions after your input that they all pay low fees. And the RBF logic can't detect that. You know, it can't process that case. Thus, you still go screw us over. But I think that objection's wrong, and the main thing is because 100 is bigger than 1. Basically, if you're actually exploiting these things, it costs you a lot more money to use transaction pinning to screw over multi-party transactions. So I think that argument's pretty simple there. I mean, we make the situation a lot better, and the bigger picture is really, like full RBF is a political trade-off. I mean, who benefits from this? It's a few people trying to accept unconfirmed transactions. Who benefits from full RBF? It's the people who want to go and have things like multi-party transactions, the people who want to have wallets that are simple. And also, there's like even legal issues. I mean, this is an actual Craig Wright tweet who, he's very against full RBF, and he's been off, threatening to go and sue miners for like mining double spends and stuff. But you can actually flip this on your head, which is say, hang on, if we go say that miners are responsible for protecting people from double spends, like, is that really how we want mining to operate? I mean, where does this go? If I want to go buy coffee with on-chain transactions and want it to work reliably, in a decentralized system, there's no good way to do this without confirmations. You really get to the point where you need people start coordinating to reject double spends. And from a technical point of view, you can't do that without a centralized authority. Now, currently, the whole zero-comp stuff's kind of, not very many people care about it anymore. But for a while, there was even talk of creating like miner associations where like miners would go and agree to use the central mempool to go and make sure that only the right transactions got in. And it's a big mess. And one of my pitches is, well, if you're a miner, you don't want this to happen in Bitcoin. It screws up the value of Bitcoin. You're much better off saying, look, double spending unconfirmed transactions easy. Here's how. This is a standard way to go do it. And let's not set up these precedents that you're supposed to do this. So, with that pitch, well, just add this to your Bitcoin.conf file and restart your node. Or if you're using Umbrel, just go click that little like lovely toggle and restart your node. And the interesting thing about this is, like, what are you really doing by doing that? I mean, I think the last guy touched on a bit in the question and answer. Well, what does writing a node really do? That's kind of a complex question, because certainly from the point of view of moving transactions around to miners, we need people to implement policies where this can happen. If you go run full RBF on your nodes, you are making it possible for people who choose to mine it to get these transactions. And that is something you're directly helping that use case for the network. So, do I want you to do this? Absolutely I do, because it incrementally makes getting full RBF replacements easier without having to do some centralized solution like, a fullrbf.com like Twitter feed service or something. So this is all well and good. But there is some nuance here as to, well, what does this really do? And again, this gets back to a little bit of math, which is, well, how do Bitcoin nodes really work, right? If you're running Umbrel on a default system without doing anything fancy, what your node actually does is it connects to 8 outgoing peers. Your node does not accept incoming connections. Potentially it does over Tor, but Tor doesn't work that reliably. So for sake of argument, let's say it doesn't. So if that's all you're doing, connecting to people, first of all, are you still helping the network? And the answer actually is yes. Because nodes that do not listen to incoming connections, they do tie together in the network in ways that are unobservable to attackers. So from a privacy point of view, this is great. It also makes it less likely for parts of the network to split off. But for full RBF specifically, the question is, if all you're doing is connecting to outgoing people, how likely is it that you're going to be connected to full RBF nodes? Well, without going, if you do the math, that's you get. If the percentage of full RBF nodes is whatever, that's your probability of connecting to at least one peer. And long story short is, once a relatively small number of people are running full RBF, it's quite likely that at least one of your 8 peers will be running it too. And I've actually measured this with checking version 24 full RBF adoption by writing a node that was set up to connect to hundreds of nodes at once. And the figures I found was that of version 24 nodes in December, about 20% were running full RBF in successfully propagating transactions. So, it's definitely catching on, but the percentage of people running that version is low. So, it's still a small percentage of total nodes. But, it's interesting that that adoption's happening. And finally, well, how would you go and make this work? Now, again, in last talk, we had the question of, well, are there other implementations in Bitcoin Core that you could go run? And this is actually one of them. So I go run this. I go maintain this patch. And it has logic that preferentially, it has logic that advertises the fact it's running full RBF and makes sure you're always connected to at least 4 other full RBF peers. Well, the neat thing about that is, if you're connected to other people, you're guaranteed to get full RBF replacements. In maybe a bigger picture, it's interesting how, this shows how Bitcoin really is a decentralized protocol. Now, this code isn't changing the definition of a block. It's just changing how you propagate transactions around. But it's still a meaningful change. And because Bitcoin is a decentralized protocol, no one could go stop me from advertising that code. If you're a little more technical, you probably know how to go run this. You check out that Git repo and compile it from source and run it. Probably at least 10% of the people here could probably go figure that out. And there's nothing stopping you from doing it. So if you're more technical, please do this. But if you're less technical, well, like I said before, we just need a bunch of people to run this, and transactions will get around. So with that, thank you. Questions, and I think also feel free to ask more technical questions again, not related to full RBF2. I can answer those as well.
So the graph you showed, that was the
Oh,
okay. So the graph you showed, that was the probability of having at least one peer that also has mempool full RBF. Right. So do you have a hunch of what's the probability of those transactions actually reaching miners?
Yeah, so that probability, that's just the math equation, basically by saying if you select nodes at random, what is the probability of you not having, what is the probability of every single one of your connections not being full RBF, and then go invert it. So you can work it out on paper if you want. Now, the thing is, the Bitcoin network doesn't really work that way in practice. And the main reason why is not all nodes connect to the same number of people. And also, like I said before, some nodes do preferential peering and all kinds of other things. And in particular, something I'm manually doing is I have a node that runs full RBF, and I'm manually connecting it to hundreds of other nodes that may be running full RBF. So I'm intentionally skewing the probability there. So to answer your question, at this point, if all you do is get Umbrel, click that button, the probability of a transaction on your node actually getting to miners is still lowish. I'm not sure what it is exactly, but it's at least, probably 50-50, right, at best. Probably less than that. But if you run a node and you have a lot of incoming peers, it's quite likely that one of those peers will be running full RBF. Nodes by default accept up to 125 incoming connections. Also, miners who do this, and Luxor is an example, tend to manually ensure that propagation works, either by running the peering thing or by manually connecting to nodes that run full RBF. So, long story short, I think the answer to your question is, if you want it to work, it's very easy to make work. What else do we have? And again, feel free to ask me technical questions. It doesn't have to be full RBF. I know there was some questions that the last guy couldn't necessarily answer. Well, this must have explained everything. Thank you.
It's the advantage of being intelligent and well-spoken. There aren't too many questions. We have a great follow-up to this, because once you've learned how to run your own node, and you've learned how to change your node significantly, you may want to start running a business. You're not a Bitcoiner anymore. You want to run a coffee shop, or you want to sell, merchandise or tickets or airline flights or whatever your thing is. And you want to receive this money, but you don't want to fly around with your personal wallet all the time. You'd like to have terminals and all this kind of stuff. Well, good news. We have created something called BTC Pay, and the man behind BTC Pay implementation in Norway, btcpay.no, we are so lucky to have him with us. Coffee entrepreneur, owns his own coffee shop in Haugesund, which has become the mecca of Norwegian Bitcoiners. The man behind the merch you're seeing today, and the man who has created btcpay.no. So yeah, I feel like anything I would say about it would just like spoil your talk. So I'm just gonna let you do it.
Okay, first of all, I'll have to apologize. My presentation is in Norwegian, but I'll directly translate it for you, since I actually made this presentation firstly for December when I had this in Oslo, so it's in Norwegian. You can all see there's a QR code on the corner here. Exciting thing is if anybody feels like paying it, you'll see something happening on the screen. Anything above 5,000 sats, something will happen. Now you can wonder. So, thing is, I'm going to talk about how we actually accept payment, both physically and online through our web shop. I sell coffee. I actually even bought coffee for Bitcoin in El Salvador. So the coffee you find on the Northern Lightning coffee bags, it's bought for Bitcoin. I bought the gas I roasted it for using Bitcoin. I roasted it myself, and I packed it and brought it here. So, who am I? Who is Kaffinista? I'm not a programmer, not a developer. I actually run a coffee roastery in Haugesund, not a coffee shop, a coffee roastery. That means I import green beans and I roast them so you get the good coffee. My experience is from sales, store management. I used to work as an insurance adjuster, and I've also worked in fall rescue. However, I got something that's a chronic disease. I got something called Crohn's disease, which actually took me out of work and made me basically passive for a couple of years, until my son had some health issues. He got leukemia, and he told me, you can't die from your disease, start doing something. So we started a coffee roastery. First of all, I'm going to go through how I started accepting payments, how I accept the payments, both physically and through the BTC Pay, LMPOS situations. Secondly, we're going to talk a little bit about the Know Your Customer anti-money laundering laws that are in Norway and what we've done to actually satisfy both Skatteetaten and my accountant. And on the third step, you can basically take payment in real value without having to give percentages to PayPal, Vipps, or all the other payment systems. So, I jumped ahead of myself just a second. No, I didn't. Okay, here we go. On site, we have experiences from El Salvador that made me realize that it's not easy to sell coffee necessarily on the site. Some people had different wallet systems. There's not a standard implementation. Somebody wants to pay on-chain, somebody wants to pay with Lightning. So you actually have to have both options. Of course, there's an LN bits-based solution for offline payments. Some of you have already seen the different terminals, like this one, or even this one. They can go offline, which means that the vendor could actually sell merchandise without having internet himself. It's the people paying that uses their net. When you do it physically, you actually have to make sure to calculate the taxes and all that physical work for accountant, and you should be somewhat technical competent because it's a bit hard to do the physical part of it. But then again, we can go over to the web shop. If you do it with web shop, I've used the WordPress, WooCommerce. Most web shops know about this. and I use Fiken, a Norwegian accounting system. These are connected together, which means when I make a sale through my WordPress WooCommerce site, it automatically goes into the accountant, and everything is put in the right places. It exports directly to the accountants. I have my taxes, my receipts, all my transaction logs ready immediately. And I can implement a POS plugin, which is point of sale plugin. So I could use my web shop as a cash register. I don't necessarily have to go through the hard part of doing the physical part. I could just use the web shop on site. Exporting and having a connection between your accountant and Fiken. The first time you set up this, it's going to cost somewhat, but it's cheaper than penalty taxes. So we go through the physical terminal things. Sorry if I'm too quick. If I sell anything through my physical terminals like these, I have to manually register it as a cash sale in my accountant system. Thank you, whoever paid me some Bitcoin. Now let's see what happens if you go over 10,000. And we got rickrolled. I'll wait till he goes away so we can actually read what I wrote. No. You have to register the value of the Bitcoin and also the Bitcoin address you got the money from. Because we have to identify our customers. The BTC address is enough identification. Okay, I'll have to look at this screen now. You also have to make sure you always calculate and note the average value of your Bitcoin constantly, because it's going to go into the accountant system and you have to make sure it's correct. You have to physically yourself go in and take out your transaction log and send it to wherever you want your cash out from, if you want to realize it. In my case, I've used Firi, which is a Norwegian exchange. Some fees, of course, but that's how they work. And the payment will be done really quickly. However, if I use my WooCommerce, my WordPress shop, all my sales automatically get exported to the accountant system. Everything is in place. My tax, I have to pay it in fiat. No problem, I'll get rid of those fiat. Tax receipts and all receipts on sale get generated automatically. So I don't have to do anything about logging or transaction logs or anything like that. I take the export files out from my web shop, send it to Firi, and I say, I want this paid out to my bank account. They take the CSV, and they pay me within a day. However, I don't usually take out the Bitcoin. I buy coffee for it. Next. LN bits is what we use for these offline and online terminals. Most of you, how many here paid for beer with Satoshis last night? Congratulations. The terminal you met on their phone was connected to Eric's wallet. So everybody who paid into us. Because that's easy system. Any cash register, anyone with a mobile phone can actually open this link and have their own cash register. So if you have like a stand and you want to have 4 people selling for you, you don't need 4 of these. Ask them to find their mobile phone, give them the link, and they can be their own cash register. In the worst case, you don't have internet. These actually have an offline function. So if I put this into power and I wanted to charge anybody, they would give you first a QR code with the invoice. If anybody scans it, that actually tells my node, hey, there's somebody paying this, make a proof pin. When I punch the square for the second time after payment, I get a proof pin in my display. Anybody who's paid will get an URL with that code in it. So when they open those URLs, they get the same 4-digit code you have on your terminal. You know they've actually paid. The basics in... There we go. The basic functions I've used is WooCommerce in WordPress. It's an easy web shop system. You can have all kinds of plugins. If you want to have like mailing lists and CRMs and everything, you could have that in WordPress. It's easily administered, and you have a lot of options. Fiken, which is my accounting system, everything, it's easy for me, it's easy for my accountant, because everything gets exported immediately. It's easy to go over, and you can actually integrate it with other cash registers. If you already have like an own terminal for Visa and all those credit cards, you could keep that, you could integrate it into Fiken as well. And the final last point is the easy plugin. This is the plugin that actually takes my sales from my WooCommerce and moves them over to Fiken and makes sure that all numbers are correctly adjusted. As I said earlier, it costs something the first time you set it up. It's about 2,500 Norwegian kroners. I don't know what that is in sats right now. But it will cost somewhat. It'll pay off if you look at the tax regulations and what the penalty taxes would be if you fuck up. BTC Pay server. As Eric said, we are running a btcpay.no server, which is basically open for Norwegian merchants. It's not like we want to be custodial, because it's meant to be non-custodial. We want people to have their own wallets, their own nodes. We want people to have their own assets. The BTC Pay server is only a service, basically. So merchants like me could actually register and say, I want to accept Bitcoin payments in my web shop, on site. It makes it easy for anyone. It gives you an LN URL address if you need that. So you could basically say to people, hey, pay me at kaffenistad@btcpay.no. So if anybody sends sats to that, it ends up in my pocket. You have Lightning implemented in it, as well as on-chain. So you could accept payments in both on-chain and Lightning payments. Thing is, I love him. Thing is, with the on-chain payments as well, BTC Pay server has a function that when you want to pay in the shop, it'll give you one QR code, the unified QR code, which is both BTC on-chain and the Lightning. That's a newer implementation. If you don't want to use that, you could go back and have the Lightning versus BTC Pay, or versus on-chain. You can connect it to already existing wallet. You could connect it to an existing node. You do not have to buy a new one to get on the BTC Pay system. And taxation. There's a few things in Norwegian law that makes it kind of difficult to navigate when it comes to taxation. We have something called the accountant's risk assessment, because accountants have to make a risk assessment. Is this money be from something criminal? Is this money laundering? This is anti-money laundering laws we have in Norway. We have to know if the person that pays with satoshis is a politically exposed person. Somehow Norwegian government have found out that, oh, if they're politically involved, we have to know, because then it could be something dodgy going on. There's this need for identification of customers. A lot of people misunderstand this and think that KYC, know your customer, means I have to know who bought that coffee. I don't have to know exactly who bought it. I have to know the BTC address. The law actually says that you have to identify where the money came from, not who it came from. So the BTC address is actually enough. If you spend the Bitcoin, yes, it's realization. You're actually taking out Bitcoin, making it Norwegian kroners, you have to tax any value difference. That means also if Bitcoin crashes, you could write off those taxes. My point is, I sell coffee. I don't sell my Bitcoin. I use my Bitcoin to buy coffee. So I never actually go through the point where I take out Bitcoin to fiat. And since I buy coffee from El Salvador, where Bitcoin is a legal currency, I'm actually just using my Bitcoin as a currency. There's no realization. So my idea would be, anybody, buy your merchandise from El Salvador. You can pay with Bitcoin. And tax directory, they say that foreign payment, the rules for foreign payment. If you're on vacation to Italy and you pay for your merchandise there, you could have it tax-free, right? Does not apply to Bitcoin. So if you go to El Salvador and you use your Bitcoin to pay for stuff, don't expect to come back home and write off those taxes. Know your customers and anti-money laundering laws. The anti-money laundering law demands that you take action decided on the risk you're running. As I'm selling coffee for a couple of 100 kronas a bag or combined, how big do you think my risk is that people use me for money laundering? Not really too big. My purchases aren't that big. And the thing is, the moment you go above 8,000 kroners, which is actually stipulated in the law, 8,000 kroners, you should always do the anti-money laundering actions. Because you never know, they might be criminal funds. The amount of funds has to actually be a part of a customer relationship. Like, you can't just have funds coming out of nowhere. Somebody would like that because then we could just have a lot of hidden satoshis and just funnel it into our business. That's money laundering. You have to know where the funds are from and who, or that you actually have a customer at the end. The size of transaction also comes into play according to the law. And before you actually accept the transaction, this is the weird thing. It says before you can accept the transaction, you have to be ready with the money laundering. Which means, in our case, if we accept Lightning or we accept on-chain payments, the payment's already coming. You could always refund. There's always this option to say, okay, I accepted this, but this transaction is no good. You can refund to customer. And then let's send it back to the address it came from. It's not too hard. That was actually all I wanted to say. And if there's anybody who's a merchant, who has a web shop, who sells on site, that wants to get paid in Bitcoin instead of Norwegian kroners, btcpay.no is open to register, and you're free to contact me or Diaful, who is also a part of the btcpay.no team, and we'll help you set it up, we'll help you get running, we'll help you take out your transactions and anything. No fees. We want to do this because we want to show you all how easy it could actually be to use Bitcoin. You saw yesterday when you paid with your Bitcoins for beers and everything, it doesn't need to be rocket science, but a lot of merchants and businesses are wary because they're not sure how to do this. It's easy if you keep it clean, keep the transaction listed, and make sure to follow the law. Okay? Any questions?
Okay, hey, this is Freedom Footprint Show. We're live at Northern Lightning Bergen 2023. We're concerned about your freedom footprint, and we want to help you spread as much freedom dioxide as possible. I'm Luke the Pseudofin, and I'm here, as always, with Knut Svanholm. Good afternoon, Knut.
Good afternoon, Luke. It's good to be here. This is the first time we're doing this stuff live.
First time doing this stuff
Yes.
live. So thanks, everyone, for being here with us. This is super exciting.
Yes, the Freedom Footprint Show is a show that absolutely no one has heard of, I think.
Pretty sure about that.
We're prioritizing quality over quantity in terms of listeners. That's our goal. So we have like the best listeners in the world, both of them. We caught them already. So yeah. So if you want to check out our YouTube channel, we do value for value. We do all the Bitcoin stuff, and we talk to interesting Bitcoin people once a week. So it's Tuesdays at...
right now it's at Tuesdays, yeah, morning European time is when it comes out, so yeah.
Yeah, so now you know about it, so there are no excuses left. And what are we talking about today, Luke? I don't know if this is illegal in Norway, hopefully so we can make a little, do something illegal. We don't believe in victimless crime, so we're going to have a little sip of what is this? Finnish licorice vodka?
Salmiakki Koskenkorva.
Yes. So you have the first one, Luke?
Yeah, that sounds
Cheers,
good.
Luke.
Cheers. Kippis.
Cheers, everyone. So the party starts here, I guess.
Party starts here,
Cheers.
absolutely.
Ooh.
Skål. Kippis. Gah!
Yes, you want a sip? Here you go, Kalle. Cheers, Kippis.
All right, so here we're going to get started. And first of all, I think I just want to say this is such a great achievement that this Northern Lightning has come off the way it has. Honestly, it's less than a month. I think Eric has actually made reference that it's 21 days since this was really properly announced. And look at this, we're all here. I just knew I had to come and make it over here. I'm so glad that that Knut could also come. And so, yeah, we're all here. And Northern Lightning, I think, has been a big success so far. So many great speakers. Everyone I've interacted with here has been awesome. So
yeah,
great to grow the community here in Scandinavia and the Nordics.
Yeah, and I sold out all the books and T-shirts. So thanks everyone who bought one. All Lightning payments. Like I've had like 90% Lightning payments in other conferences, but this is the first one where everyone paid via the Lightning network. So that's worth an applause to it. From me to you. That's all. And of course, yeah, there's still some official merch for the conference left, and we still have some Bitcoin standards, and fiat standards left if you want them. And what else? What are we going to talk about today, Luke?
Yeah, no, bear with us, because this is the first time we're doing this live. We are going to turn this over to have some questions, some Q&A and all this, but I think a little bit, you went into some detail about your talk, and you've been kind of working on some of these ideas. So maybe you can talk a little bit about kind of your thought process on how you build your talks and ideas, and how these ones have been forming for you lately.
I mean, you try something out, and then you see what works, and then you rethink everything over and over again. I think this was Terry Pratchett who said, like, second thoughts are always fine, but what about third thoughts? Few people think third thoughts. So that's what I try to do. I try to add an extra thought to and see where we end up. But like talking to other Bitcoiners is extremely helpful in your thought process, and what angles you can use, and what this thing really is, because I truly believe that no one on earth actually understands Bitcoin. It's you can understand it to a certain degree, and certain aspects of it, like you can understand the technical aspects or the monetary aspects or maybe the philosophical aspects, but I think very few people understand all of it. I think Giacomo Zucco, who unfortunately isn't with us here today, he had some problems, but
yeah, he didn't die.
He didn't die. He's still alive. So he made some Venn diagram with himself in the middle about Bitcoin understanding, which is probably pretty accurate. So yeah, that's.
Well, so you've been building out this kind of "you are your Bitcoin" thing, and that was the kind of the thesis of the talk today. But I've seen how you've been building this on top of also the Bitcoin social layer stuff and all of these other things. And I think a conference like this is really the example of the Bitcoin social layer. And now we're all here embodying the Bitcoin. So what do you have to say kind of about these types of conferences and the value that it brings to the Bitcoin community?
I mean, this is layer 0. Like, everyone knows what layer 1 is. That's the time chain, and layer 2 is the Lightning Network. But we are layer 0. We're like, if you view Bitcoin from the bottom up, the people are absolutely essential for any of it to work. And there's a few things about interacting with other Bitcoiners. I think I've experienced, and I continue to experience every time I'm in a new Telegram group or whatever with other Bitcoiners working on some project, that we are all incentivized to help one another, because we know that if Bitcoiners succeed, Bitcoin succeeds, and vice versa. So like if Bitcoin succeeds, Bitcoiners succeed. And so we all have an incentive to help one another. And if you add the low time preference thing of having absolutely sound money to that mix, you realize that Bitcoiners don't really want to spend their sats. They want to keep most of them, at least, and spend whatever else they have, including their reputational capital and being nice to one another before they spend sats. So we rarely shoot sats around back and forth. We rather just, help each other. And I think this is the most beautiful thing about it. And I believe that in the future, the necessity for especially smaller transaction will go down and not up. I mean, money is still important because it allows us to perform economic calculation, which is what makes civilization tick, what makes economic progress possible. But still, in a world where everyone prioritizes quality over quantity and is incentivized to help one another, the amount of times we actually do transactions, it's going to get smaller over time, I believe.
Well, okay, let's return to that point quickly in a second here, but I've got just one comment. I think it's been awesome that we've gotten to go buy beers with Bitcoin. I mean, that never happens.
Yeah. I mean, still, having said all that with the long-term future thing, I still think the Lightning Network, isn't it fantastic? It's like the most underrated technology on Earth. Like, I'd like to quote Terry Pratchett again here, real stupidity beats artificial intelligence all the time. Like, and that's what the Lightning Network is. It's real stupidity, and there's value there, for sure.
And the thing about it, too, is that we have this hodling mindset, and especially right now when the price is pumping and everyone's feeling good and all this, maybe you don't want to part with your sats or anything, but I think what I always say to people is that do a preemptive stack so that you can go spend some Bitcoin, because we really do need to move it around, and we really do need to get it going in the ecosystem so that adoption is possible. The more merchants that we go to and say, hey, I will pay you in Bitcoin, please, like if you accept it, and they agree to that, and then you get that moving, but you do need to spend your Bitcoin. So what I did before I came here was I did a preemptive stack, I think a month ago when I first heard about it, and now I don't mind having a little spend wallet, and I'm having a lot of fun with it.
So you're doing instead of doing spend and replace, you're doing replace and then spend.
Something like that. It's more like I don't know. I'm constantly bullish, and I'd rather bet that if I stack today, that if I spend it in a month or something, but I don't really care. It's just more like that's the solution that I suggest to people to be able to enable this spending, and that's the idea that I have. So.
Yeah, and that to this, like when we see the talks about the CBDCs and everything, and we hear the narrative that like Europe is in a sort of a dire situation, and like governments are getting more and more intrusive, more and more authoritarian, and they are very much willing to, both on a state level and an EU level, to reduce our individual rights for political points, be it the environment or to fight some sort of virus that shall not be named, or fight terrorism or drugs, or whatever the not so well defined villain of the day is, because it's always ill defined, and it's always about replacing individual freedoms with more communism, basically, and that is violence. We have to admit to ourselves that is a very violent way of running a society. And the more and more we can do things consensually and without a threat of violence or a coercion, the faster we get to a more peaceful world. And Bitcoin sort of has to be a parallel reality. There's no going around that. And all of these weird taxes around Bitcoin. I mean, taxes around Bitcoin are pretty weird when you think about what Bitcoin is. It's just speech. So how do you tax speech? Well, Bitcoin has illuminated that monetary transactions are nothing but the exchange of information. There's nothing else there. And so all the freedom of speech laws are flawed because they don't allow freedom of speech when it comes to value. So they're all distorted in some way or another. And I believe as Bitcoin grows, especially as we saw Joe's presentation of adoption in Africa and everything, and we see it on other continents where people are even more screwed over by their governments than we are here, then it's going at some point it truly is an unstoppable force, because why should different rules apply to different people across the world? And I believe like in 2023, everyone on Earth using social media and Zoom calls, video calls, we have sort of everyone. We're connected to almost every other human being on Earth via the click of a button, or yeah, you may have to go through a friend and then go to a friend, but we're so connected. And when we are, it becomes very obvious that it's pretty ridiculous that different rule sets should apply to different people, you know, based on where on the globe they are and where they were born. It's in my opinion, my very humble opinion, retarded. And it's becoming more and more obvious. And I think social media and video calls and Bitcoin is a very, very potent combination for just enabling people to be nice to one another and not fall for false narratives.
That's pretty good, isn't it? So to come back a little bit to the concept that we're going to start to actually reduce the transactions. This is something you talked about in the past in some of your talks, but can you go into a little more detail about what you think about there?
Reducing the number of...
that we don't have to actually make transactions anymore. People will just volunteer their time or their resources to one another to avoid actually having to move the Bitcoin.
I think I never met my grandfather on my father's side, but my father told me a saying of his that was passed down the generations, and I've been thinking about it ever since I first heard it, and it becomes better and better over time. And what he said was, that which you can do without you own. And it's like sort of the flip side of your material things end up owning you. Because if you don't need, if you have no urge to own like a golden Lambo, you don't need the golden Lambo. You already own it because you're above it. But that goes for absolutely everything. Like, I enjoy conversations with Bitcoiners, spending time with my family, good food and a good glass of wine every now and then, and playing guitar maybe. I'd like to have a toothbrush to brush my teeth. That's about it. Like, and I think Bitcoin makes people, you know, philosophically like come closer to this insight that material excess is not where it is. Like, that's not important. You may still want some good stuff in your life, but the low time preference thing and the how your Bitcoin stack grows over time if you don't spend it will make you focus on quality over quantity. And I think this is a very important, you know, psychological development for mankind.
Yeah, and I think the idea as well, the kind of hopeful thing here is that it's going to start to reduce the consumption in the world, basically, if everyone starts to, try to focus on those things that are low time preference and avoid this, the golden Lambo mentality and all this. And so it's really going to trend us towards a world that, if people don't need as much, we don't need to consume as much. And I think no matter what your feelings or opinions are about climate and what humanity is doing to it, just by not having to have this constant rat race of consumerism, that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's how we fix all problems. So many problems stem from consumerism. That's what consumerism is, when you boil it down to its essentials, is that it's a misallocation of resources. That's all it is. And without sound money, you get a misallocation of resources in society. So that's basically it there. And another thing, which is insanely optimistic, is that if we get this Bitcoin economy to start really working with, factories and making stuff and do globalism 2.0 with real money, then that in itself will drive down the production costs and transportation costs of absolutely everything. So the really funny thing about that is that in itself benefits not only Bitcoiners but everyone. Like, having a more well-oiled world economy is better for everyone. So Bitcoin is for everyone, and no coiners are Bitcoiners too. We're just ahead of the curve.
There we go. I always go a little bit crazy in every episode. My role in the show, by the way, usually we have a guest, and we've had some great people on so far. Joe Nakamoto was one just a couple of weeks ago, for example. And so my role is usually Knut and the guest have a conversation, but I always drop in with something just a little bit crazy. And so I'm going to do just my little bit of crazy right now.
And you're my lifeline as well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. When we run out of something, I come in with the sneaky question at the end there. But yeah, my little bit of crazy for today is another little bit of line on kind of the hopefulness here. And I've just been reading a book called Fingerprints of the Gods, and some people might have heard of that one, and it's slightly controversial if you have or have not heard about it. But it's basically this idea that that a lot of ancient monuments might have been built by a civilization that's before what we understand. And I'm not going to get into the whole synopsis, but it's pretty convincing. But the real thrust of it is that humanity got lost by some kind of catastrophe, and we weren't able to carry our knowledge on into the future with anything except some ancient monuments, something like that is the idea. So what it actually got me thinking about when I read this book, when I got to the end, it ends with a thought experiment. What would we do now if we were actually faced with complete annihilation of the world? And yeah, so
that sounds bleak.
I know, it does sound bleak. But I think the thought that it left me with is that the world is messed up in so many ways. We've got just absolutely misaligned incentives, people in absolute poverty, as Joe discussed in his Africa piece, and exploitation, corruption, and all this sort of thing. But if we can fix the monetary system and make everything fair, humanity can start to build this low time preference stuff that might actually give us a chance at transcending whatever has held humanity back so far. We keep on marching with this progress, and not progress in the sense of progressive, this whole thing that we have to constantly change the world for the better, but that we advance somehow. We learn things that do things better. And that's my hope for Bitcoin, personally.
Yeah, that's a good angle. But the obvious follow-up question from the Austrian perspective is who gets to decide what that means, what human progress is, and what are we going to go to the moon again if we were ever there? We're going to go to Mars. We're going to cure cancer, save the climate, or what are we going to do? And the point with Bitcoin is that everyone gets to decide for themselves what to do with their lives and what their role in whatever narrative they choose to cling on to is. So, and I think that's extremely powerful because, in my opinion, that's an optimization of resource allocation instead of just this infinite resource misallocation. And furthermore, if Bitcoin should fail tomorrow, I don't know, because we didn't click the replace by fee button in Umbrel, then we're still here. Every one of us is still here. And we still have our social media connections, and we still have all the other technologies. And that's the true thing. And if it's true that Bitcoin, everything that Bitcoin enabled was already in us, then what's the problem? We're still here, and we can still collaborate, and we can still trade other stuff. And all the Bitcoiners have already shown their true colors. So this is also one of the ironies of Bitcoin. There are many, Bitcoin is love, and Bitcoin is also for enemies. But also, the don't trust, verify attitude of Bitcoin developers enables us to trust each other on a whole different level, because we know who the real Bitcoiners are, and whenever there's a bad seed, we slay our heroes instantly. So there are no idols in Bitcoin, and that's a very good thing. But we all found that within this community already. So yeah, I'm very hopeful.
Very hopeful, and I guess to draw it back to the first topic we talked about, This is why this stuff is important, why these conferences are important. It brings everyone together and we can make these connections. Face-to-face is so much better than online. And I know that every time we do one of these things, relationships get stronger, projects get built, and that's the true value of this sort of thing. So
Absolutely. That's the main reason we do the podcast.
Exactly, exactly. So, I think this was this is a great preview of what you get every week in our show, basically with some kind of guest. But I think
I'm trying to get better at shutting up whenever the guest is speaking and so on. And so we're still working on it.
Yeah. It's like 60-40 these days.
Getting there.
Getting there.
So
but I think maybe now is a good time to open up for questions.
Yes. Do you have any questions for us? Yes, Kalle.
Yeah. So, what's your view on when Bitcoin started? Did Bitcoin start in January 3rd, 2009, or has it always existed? Just that the hash rate was really, really low.
Let's repeat the question because I think there's some audio issues. So when did Bitcoin start is the question, and it's at the January 3rd or the hash rate starting.
Yeah. So you can say that Bitcoin has already existed since forever. It just had an extremely low hash rate up until 2009. I would say this is a personal, and this ties into whether Bitcoin is an invention or a discovery, which I go on and on about all the time as well. And for me, my belief in it was cemented during the fork wars, the hash wars of 2017, when the big miners and the big companies decided to do the SegWit upgrade first and then increase the block size, double the block size. But that was rejected by the users, showing everyone that Bitcoin actually functioned as intended. So you got the closest thing we'll ever get to a proof of decentralization. I mean, how do you prove that something is sufficiently decentralized? You can't really do that. But to me, that was proof enough. So I could say that I personally discovered Bitcoin after that point. I think discovering Bitcoin is a personal, everything about Bitcoin is a personal journey. So like hyper-Bitcoinization is a personal thing too. So I guess that's my best answer. I really do like the idea that it always existed, but at a very minuscule hash rate. That's a very eloquent way of putting it. And yeah, that really fits this idea that we already had it in us, all of it. So we just had to figure out, like the thing another catchphrase I use is like the Beatles were right, all we needed was love, they just hadn't found the equation for it yet. So I guess that's the answer to your question. Anyone else? Or you're all tired of being at a conference now? Huh?
Come on, you can ask Knut. Yeah, there we go, in the back.
Maybe you could shout out your socials.
Yeah. The Freedom Footprint show is on Consensus Network's YouTube channel. So Consensus Network is the publishing house that publishes my books, and they have you can find them at bitcoinbook.shop. That's probably the easiest way. Bitcoinbook.shop or consensusnetwork.com with a consensus.
Consensus.network. Consensus with a K.
Yeah. Consensus.network with a K. That was tricky enough.
And we are at Footprint Show for the show itself.
We're at Footprint Show on Twitter, yes. And I'm at Knut Svanholm on Twitter.
And mine is probably the most difficult one because I'm still half named, but I'm at BTC Pseudofin. We can go into my Pseudofin story another time, but yeah.
And I have a website which I'm absolutely horrible at maintaining and updating, and it's knutsvanholm.com, where you find all the books and all the merch, if you want that. And what else do we have? Like,
well, no, I mean, I think that's the main stuff. I mean, I guess I would say it's fantastic to get to talk to Bitcoiners in this type of thing, have discussions. So I mean that's why I'm here and helping to expand the Bitcoin message. So If anyone's interested in getting involved with Consensus Network, by the way, I'm going to sort of tie into the little workshop that I was going to do, but now for scheduling reasons might not happen. Consensus does translation and publishing of primarily Bitcoin books. It's a Bitcoin-only publishing house, but it is releasing some non-Bitcoin related books, including a new book that might be coming out from this guy from Knut.
Yeah, I'm
fairly
writing
soon.
a book about praxeology. So I'm trying to get it, make that a bit more accessible is the goal of the book. So we'll have it out in a couple of months.
Exactly. But the thing is, Consensus always needs people who want to translate Bitcoin books into different languages. In Norwegian, we only have Bitcoin har det penga by Martin, and we were working on the Bitcoin standard. But if you want to help to get more Norwegian books or Swedish or anything like that, Consensus Network, you can help. Translation is something to help spread this message. So that's definitely something, so you can reach out to any of us basically if you want to get involved. So that's just a little plug for Consensus that I'll make right there. Yes, Kalle.
So if you're Finnish or German speaking, is there any good technical books at Consensus?
There's a fantastic book called Bitcoin Begreifen in German. And it's also called in Finnish. I don't know what it's called in Finnish.
Yeah, I think we're working on the Grokking Bitcoin in Finnish. Yeah.
So that's if you haven't read Kalle's book, it's probably the most underrated book in Bitcoin, I'd say, because it's a book every Bitcoiner should have. It's a technical book, but it builds from the ground up. So if you want a really sturdy, robust foundation of how Bitcoin works, Kalle's book is highly recommended.
Listen to these people.
Yes.
So that's it. Yep.
Yes. We do that thing we talked about later.
So hey, is there any more questions? It's Q&A time with Knut, basically. So.
And with you.
Oh yeah, someone people ask me questions, I guess. Anything? We've got a couple. Yeah. Go ahead.
What are you looking forward to the most in the coming year or so?
Stuff like this. I guess, hanging out with Bitcoiners, having interesting conversations, and spending time with my family, and also not spending time with my family, but traveling and meeting Bitcoiners. Like, those are sort of the two things I like to do the most. So, looking forward to all of it. I mean, what's not to look forward to? Well, CBDCs and, constant stomping boot to the face and that. I'm not looking forward to that. But all the rest, yes, sure.
I think we had one more. Yep.
Have you got any inside information on any of the amazing places in the world, like Madeira, where they're trying to...
Oh yes, I have insider information about the future of mankind, which is, I'm working with the Free Madeira group, and we're trying to make the island of Madeira more Bitcoin friendly. It's a semi-autonomous region. It belongs to Portugal, but they have quite a lot of autonomy there. So we've been working with the president there and his cabinet for quite a while, and there are orange-pilled people all over that parliament, and we're orange-pilling more and more businesses and stuff on the island. The organization is set up. You can go to freemadeira.com to see what it's all about and who's on the board and so on. And there's a bunch of investment going on. More things are happening than you can see at the surface level. Madeira has quite an aging population, and most of the tourism is also for like elderly people coming there. But there's now an influx of Bitcoiners and digital nomads in general. I mean, I love the island since way before Bitcoin. If you haven't been there, I certainly recommend going. Even if you weren't Bitcoiners, I'd recommend it because it's a beautiful, beautiful place. And rumors has it that there will be a conference there at some point and some stuff happening.
From the rumors that I've heard, you should try and go to that one.
Yeah.
Beginning of every month, they do a different meeting.
Yeah, we have a meetup every month. I'm there occasionally, so I try to go there. The plan was to go there 4 times a year, but I think, to be honest, it will probably be more like 2 times a year. since I'm doing all the other traveling now. So, but we'll see. Whenever something interesting happens, I'm there, and there's a bunch of people on the ground there, and there's always Bitcoiners coming in. Yeah, the meetups are fun. Andre, who started the project, has a co-working space in the middle of Funchal where the meetups are, and there are workshops, and we're trying to orange people one by one there and making a little thing. The thing is with these Bitcoin places like Bitcoin Beach and Madeira and whatever, they're usually advertised as like, here's the Bitcoin thing happening, but it's more like, here is yet another place where the Bitcoin thing isn't really happening, but we're going to push for it. And if we all chip in and start to try to make it happen here, there's a higher likelihood. I got a haircut on Madeira a couple of weeks back and paid in sat. So yeah, some stuff are happening. Some stuff is happening. Sorry?
Like orange pilling on the bar staff in the nightclub last night.
Exactly. That's yeah. Yeah, people don't realize how easy it is to spend Bitcoin. Like, the only thing that stops you from doing that is your own brain. Yeah.
You know, we talked to Joe about that actually, about like kind of this orange pilling process, and I really wonder what the bartenders are going to actually think and do in the future. Like, they got this wonderful experience last night, and how smooth that all was. But I'm sure Eric paid them in NOK at the end of the night or something like that. But regardless, they got to see how well it worked, and I hope that seed stuck. But I really wonder how much longer that's going to go. So,
and the saying "everything is good for Bitcoin" is true, because everything is connected. Like, every time anyone utters the word Bitcoin, price goes up just a little bit because it's all connected. It's all part of the same thing. So Bitcoin the T-shirt and Bitcoin the currency, or Bitcoin the coffee mug, are just aspects of the same phenomenon. And I think, Eric, that we're running out of time here. Yes, it's a perfect way to illustrate how the scarcity of Bitcoin. Like, we're running out of time. That's a beautiful thing.
Scarcest thing in the world.
Yes.
So I think that's it. Thanks everyone for joining us. It's been awesome.
Yeah.
And
thanks for listening.